into them. Our minutes are being taken off of the recording tonight, so be sure you state your name and speak clearly into the microphones. Our next Bike and Pedestrian Subcommittee meeting will be next Tuesday night, August 12th, 7:30 p.m. in the Memorial Conference Room, which is the conference room on the other side of Town Hall. The next Planning Board meeting is scheduled for August 19th, 2014 in the Matthew Thornton Room, which is this room. Before we go further, I will appoint Nelson to sit in and vote for Alastair tonight, who is not with us. So we've got a full board with 7 members. And with that, that brings us to item number 2 on our agenda, which is the Planning and Zoning Administrator's Report.
I have nothing tonight.
Donna has nothing to offer for a report. Are there any members of the board who have questions for the staff? Seeing none, that moves us quickly past item 2 on our agenda. Item 3 on our agenda is the John J. Flatley Company as the applicant and owner, and its review for acceptance and consideration of final approval of an application for a conditional use permit to permit a future mixed-use development consisting of industrial, multifamily residential, commercial, restaurant, and retail uses. The parcels are located at 645, 673, 685, 703, and 707 DW Highway in the I-1 Industrial, Aquifer Conservation, and Wellhead Protection Districts, Tax Map 6E, lots 3-1, 3-3, 3-4, 3-5, and 3-6. This item was continued from the July 22nd, 2014 Planning Board meeting. Donna, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant?
Just that the applicant's already aware, but basically until that middle piece is figured out, no decisions can really be made because the lot lines and everything hasn't been figured out, which leaves a lot still open to discuss. So it's a good discussion starting piece for tonight. And then also Arnett is currently reviewing the fiscal impacts review, and staff will inform the board and the applicant once we have that answer. And staff also recommends that since this traffic is more, I guess, complex, that potentially CLD would be reviewing that if the board's open to that idea.
So staff's recommending that the board consider and potentially recommend a or require a traffic report by peer review?
Right.
Okay. Please introduce yourself and tell us about the application. Sorry.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brannon.
Can you touch the button on your microphone? I don't think it's on.
Yep.
It's on now? Okay.
I'll start over. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Chad Brannon. I'm a civil engineer with Fieldstone Land Consultants. Our office is located at 206 Elm Street in Milford, New Hampshire. And with me tonight is Kevin Walker from the John J. Flatley Company. We're before you this evening seeking a conditional use permit for a mixed-use development consisting of industrial, multifamily, residential, restaurant, and commercial retail uses. As you may recall, this application was before the board back on April 15th for a pre-submission hearing. At present, John J. Flatley owns a series of 5 contiguous parcels identified on Merrimack's assessor's map 6E as lots 3-1, 3-3, 3-4, 3-5, and 3-6. The collective area of the parcels totals approximately 149 acres with 4,300 linear feet of frontage on Daniel Webster Highway. The property is located on the east side of Daniel Webster Highway, just north of Hilton Drive and approximately 1,350 feet from the intersection of Bedford Road and Daniel Webster Highway. The site is situated in the I-1 Industrial District, and portions of the site are situated in the Aquifer Conservation, Wellhead Protection, Elderly Housing, and Wetland Conservation overlay districts. The geometry of the site is somewhat unique due to the St. Cobain company owning a property which is basically situated in the center of the parcel. That property is right here. The subject properties are mostly vacant with the exception of a single family home and garage, as well as the former fish hatchery located along the Daniel Webster Highway, which is basically near the center of the site in this area here. The ground cover for the site consists of a mix of open field area on the southwesterly portion, Natural woodland areas along the southeasterly portion, and the remainder of the site consists of a mix of woodland and brush since it was recently logged. So that would mainly be the area over in here. The parcels do have some jurisdictional wetlands within the boundaries. Those wetlands were field delineated and located by our office, consist of an isolated wetland here, another wetland area here. There's a wetland area adjacent to the Daniel Webster Highway located there. There's also 2 ponds located here which have associated wetland boundaries, and then they outfall into a stream which runs from west to east, ultimately going under the railroad and discharging into the Merrimack River. And the last wetland on the property is located along the northern boundary here. It's a small finger which discharges off the property. The terrain of the property generally consists of mild slopes throughout, ranging from 1 to 10%, with the exception of the areas adjacent to the stream where the slopes do exceed 25% in some areas. You know, there's a pretty good bank where there's a slope adjacent to the stream. Throughout the property, there are gravel roads providing access to the various parcels. They also provide access to a municipal sewer easement and line that runs and traverses through the property, and that's located here, traverses up through there. There's also, the municipal system also runs along the railroad along the southern boundary of the property. Overhead electric, telephone, cable, sewer, water, and natural gas utilities are available along the Daniel Webster Highway. So taking a look at the master development plan, you'll notice the site has been laid out in such a way to transition from residential to retail to industrial while moving from south to north through the property. Basically what we've done is tried to situate the multifamily residential housing in an area that's compatible with the single-family residential housing along Manfred Drive. You will also notice a large warehouse development shown along the railroad and behind the St. Cobain property. It's situated here. As you may already know, this portion of the property is currently under a purchase and sales agreement with FW Webb to construct over 1 million square feet of warehouse and office space. This development will take place over approximately 64 acres and will be handled as an out parcel and will therefore not be part of the conditional use permitting process. While this is under a purchase and sale, we would like to stress to the board that the John J. Flatley Company had this in its mixed use concept, or in mind in the concept, while dealing with FW Webb. It was mentioned at a past meeting that other mixed uses in town in the past have built the apartments or condos and had done nothing else. We believe that the FW Webb development taking place on this project needs to at least be acknowledged, as it would not be occurring if it were not for John Flatley. As such, we would like the ability to build the apartments with no restrictions. I believe at the April 15th meeting there was some concern about issuing or allowing the apartments to be constructed in phase 1 because typically the town will be looking for some commercial or industrial development at the same time, and we're hoping to get through to the board that there is, a large development, industrial development that's going to be happening basically at the same time, and we're hoping to take benefit of that and allow the residential portion to be phase 1, frankly. So when you take out the industrial area, which consists, or the FW Webb area, which consists of approximately 64 acres, you end out with a remainder of 85 acres, which continues to meet the requirements for a mixed-use development per the regulations. So taking a look at the master plan, the development associated with this project includes a multifamily residential development consisting of 240 residential apartments, 296,000 square feet of commercial real estate, or commercial space, retail space, 120,000 square feet of industrial space, and a 242-seat restaurant. This may change to some degree as the site gets marketed and users become evident. And we understand that issues such as traffic, parking, drainage, and everything will be handled on a site plan by site plan basis as each user, comes into play and ultimately a site plan application is submitted. The apartment area, as shown, currently proposes 5 48-unit buildings, a clubhouse, a pool area, tennis courts, and a playground area. The 240 units will consist of 110 one-bedroom units and 130 two-bedroom units. This density conforms to the requirements as outlined in the Plan Unit Development Regulations. That regulation states that you're allowed 7 single-family units per acre and 6 two-bedroom units per acre. The green shaded area that was submitted on the master plan with the application depicts an area of 45.5 acres of land. Of that land area, 37.5 acres consists of acceptable land, and the requirement to satisfy the density is 36.7. So we exceed the area requirement based on that green shaded area by just under an acre. Just to explain what that represented. It was depicted in, I think, the last note of the plan as well.
Chad, hang on one second. I think we may have a question for
I'm
you.
just curious what green shaded area. Are you talking about the entire green shaded on that?
Not on
Not
his
this
map.
plan.
Your map has got a different green shaded area.
It does?
Yeah. In the maps that were sent out to us, the green shaded area is the area they wish to count as providing the acreage for the residential, to support the residential.
It would be that shaded area.
Including the big box space and all that?
It does not include the area,
I see there's a white line around it.
the building area or the parking area for any of the retail space, but it does go around it. And it's my understanding that there were a number of meetings with staff in the past. Some of that staff has moved on, but and that there was an understanding that the density for the residential development can somewhat, or the area that supports the density can somewhat sprawl through the site. And so we are getting, relatively close to some of the retail space in order to satisfy that density requirement.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question?
Of course, Mr. Bonaslawski.
You got that whole residential area now. Might as well tell you now, I don't agree with your parking. Because you said 100 apartments, one-bedroom apartment, and 100 cars. A lot of people have one bedroom, 2 people in there with 2 cars. So I'll be questioning, before you go much further, about you might have to arrange more parking in there.
I'm actually going to address the parking.
Okay.
And I think there must be a misunderstanding because the plan that we have before you actually, every one of the uses satisfies the local parking requirements. The local parking requirements stipulate, I believe it's 1.25 spaces per bedroom plus 0.5 spaces per dwelling unit, which ends out being, I think, 600 and change for required parking spaces, which we do. I mean, when you look at the residential layout, there is a lot of parking shown there. And we wanted to have a dialogue about that this evening because it averages out to about 2.7 parking spaces per unit. And what the Flatley Company has found through the years is that 1.8 in that range is typically where their needs lie. So we could be looking at showing future parking on the plan, but requesting and showing, designing, and getting permitting for future parking, but only constructing 1.8 spaces per unit as needed, which would save us, or which would reduce the parking that's built by 233 spaces, I believe.
I'll wait with the rest of my questions till you get into the parking phase.
Sure.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that. Look forward to that. Please continue with, before I interrupted you.
Sure, no problem. As I stated before, the apartment area has been sited on the southern boundary of the site, as this use is more compatible with the adjacent single-family homes on Lantern Lane, and the intent is to transition into the retail and industrial uses. The required buffering between single-family residential and the multifamily is 30 feet per the regulations, using natural buffering, which is the type 4 buffering in the code. The current layout provides for 67 plus feet of natural buffering at the narrowest spot. This more than doubles the buffering requirements along this section, and it's 67 feet in this location right here. And as you can see, we don't have any buildings or anything located in that, in proximity to that area. It increases to like 80 to 85 feet through this area here, and obviously gets much larger through this section in here. The buffer area will also be incorporated into a proposed open space area as depicted on the master plan. And if I may, I'm just going to flip the page back to the first sheet.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason why I wanted to flip back to this first sheet is because the open space was not shown on the plan that was submitted with the application, and has since been added to the plan. So the buffer area will be incorporated into a proposed open space area, which is depicted on the plan. The open space area will extend all along the southern boundary, wrap around the residential, encompass the stream that runs through the property, as well as the wetland and wetland buffers, extend up into the retail area, and ultimately come out towards Daniel Webster Highway and capture the two ponds, the former fish hatchery. And that total area consists of approximately 22.5 acres. As part of this development, this area will be enhanced to include seating and walkways. There will be an internal trail or walkway network that will connect all the components of the development. So you'll be able to leave the residential project, come into the retail. There'll be some form of a trail through here, but you'll also be able to cross through the open space area and get to the other facets of the project. The commercial retail component of the development is proposed to consist of 296,000 square feet. The plan shows this broken up over 9 buildings ranging from 6,000 square feet to 180,000 square feet, which is the big box building, if you will. The retail area will consist of various size buildings that may house one or multiple retail stores. The 120,000 square foot high bay industrial building proposed essentially the same building and layout that I believe this board previously approved on lot 3-5, and it basically has been relocated from its original location, which was down in this area, in order to contemplate the construction of the FW Webb building, and relocated over here. So it's a very similar layout, same size building, just relocated. The parking for each component of the development meets the local requirements. And I was going to go over the parking breakdown, the 1.25 and everything, but I've already done that. So basically what we've done is we've gone through, prepared the master plan to meet all the regulations from the standpoint of parking anyways. And so we believe everything that's shown on that plan shows the associated parking that's required per the regulation. We also believe that In some cases, it's excessive, and I think in reviewing the April 15th minutes, there was a request from at least one of the board members to maybe look at, alternative ways to address parking or reduce paving and parking, and we certainly plan on doing that. I just think it's important for us to first show that the site meets the regulations, and then maybe address that on a site-by-site basis through the site plan review process. But I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have pertaining to parking or anything of that nature. The entire site will be serviced by town sewer, water, natural gas, underground electric, telephone, and cable. The individual connections and designs will be prepared as part of the site plan approval process for each phase of the development. The property will be accessed through the existing signalized entrance at the St. Cobain site, which is located here, as well as 3 new entrances or access points. Vanessa and Associates prepared a traffic impact and access study which details the proposed access points. Based on this study, 1 additional set of traffic lights will be required. This will be triggered when and if the big box store is constructed here. So that signalized entrance would be there. The other 2 proposed intersections would be stop sign controlled. We are showing a dedicated entrance to the residential development. We really want to minimize the traffic through that area and isolate that use from the commercial and industrial elements of the site. So in summary, there will be off-site improvements at each of the 4 intersections. There will be 1 dedicated access for the residential development, which will be a stop-controlled intersection. The commercial and industrial components of the project will be serviced by 3 access points. This will consist of 1 new signalized intersection, 1 stop-controlled intersection, and the existing intersection at the St. Cobain entrance. There were many comments in the staff memo pertaining to the subdivision of the property and depicting individual lots for each building or use. The reason that this was not incorporated in the original master plan is simply due to the fact that that John J. Flatley Company has always maintained ownership of their property. It is also difficult to depict the proposed lot lines at this stage because the users are really not known. I mean, we're doing the best we can to depict the way they're envisioning the site being developed. But once we get through the conditional use process and the site starts to get marketed as the users come, there is a chance that certain elements on this plan will be modified and we'll have to come before the board again and discuss those. With this said, after weighing the comments and the potential need to subdivide for financial reasons, we will show a conceptual plan of the property, but we would like to request zoning relief for setbacks to any future interior property lines, as well as relief from the easterly property line along the St. Cobain property here. If you take a look at the layout, if we started striking a line between these 2 buildings there, we wouldn't meet the technical 20-foot setback requirements between the property line and the building. And as such, in some areas, we may not meet some of the buffering requirements, although the buffering between like uses is pretty minimal. In discussing this, the applicant discussing this with town staff, it was our understanding that this could be waived or relief could be granted from the planning board as part of the conditional use process, so we would like to request that at this time. And then in regards to the project phasing, it is difficult to project exactly how this project will be developed, because so many aspects of it will be market-driven. Currently, the residential portion will be Phase 1. It'll ultimately be constructed by the John J. Flatley Company. The remaining pad sites will be actively marketed and developed as users come in and sign on. With that said, the Flatley Company does have a lot of development going on in Nashua currently, and if they project or see an interest, a lot of times they will go forward and build, let's say, a portion of the retail development, and then sometimes you got to have the product in order to get the users, and so that there will be some discussion and ultimately some decisions made potentially on what the next step will be, but I'm sure it will be a function of what the response is once this property is marketed. And as I stated earlier, we would like, if at all possible, there to be no restrictions on the residential portion of this project, mainly due to the fact that there is a large amount of development that's moving forward currently on this project, and that being mainly the FW Web development. So at this point, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that the board may have, or I can go into the conditional use items and just read those items into the record.
Let's see what we have for questions from members of the board. Does anybody have questions or comments? Yep. Desiree.
I have a few questions here that I made note of. Can you talk a little bit about the FW Web? Is it going to be distribution or manufacturing? Like, what kind of services are they going to be providing when you go to bring that through?
My understanding is it's going to be a distribution facility, mainly warehousing and distribution.
Just Kevin Walk from John J. Flatley Company for the record. Yeah, Chad has that pretty much down. It is mainly going to be a distribution center. If there is somebody a small contractor that may need a specific boiler, instead of shipping it in bulk, they'll allow him to come to the store or come to the warehouse and pick it up. So there's not going to be a lot of bulk people coming in to pick up. There's not going to be a retail area there, from my understanding. This is their plan, not so much ours. But that is going to be, I believe it's somewhere around 970-something thousand square feet of warehouse, and the other 30 is going to be offices.
Right. Okay. I just asked to make sure that there's not going to be any kind of chemicals that are delivered or any kind of hazards or smells or anything that are going to be in the area, especially as you try to develop multi-use and protecting the residential to the side there as well. So that sounds good. And you talked about the density of the apartments, and on the next sheet where you talk about how you calculate it with the green space. Personally, I'd like to see a little more connection between what you're saying you're going to do a connective. I'd like to see the trail system that's going to connect through, because to say that you're wrapping around, like you're taking all the area around the backside of the big box store and using that towards the residential, but it really doesn't provide anything. And kids aren't going to be playing on the backside of the box store. So it's like spaces that are really used for the multi-use would be what I would be looking for in that calculation. So.
Anything else?
Yeah, one more.
Sure. You're not restricted. You can have two.
And I was just saying, I agree with your approach to the parking aspect of it in terms of taking, finding out what the maximums are, and then like with your experience with the multi-use being like 1.8 spaces per, if you found that that's the case for residential and it's not going to produce a burden, proposing a future build out if needed is good, because less built parking I think is better at this point. So, and I'd like to see personally more breakup in the parking and kind of the layout. I know this is all preliminary, but we're looking at the apartments are looking at each other. They're not going to get any kind of view. There's a lot of, at least looking from the road coming down here, it's a nice view. So I would think that if they were canted so they aren't staring right at each other, it would make for a better scenery and like maybe more green space in the parking in itself. But otherwise, thank you.
This plan is a little, it's deceiving because of the size of it. That space in between the buildings, and there will be some variation as to how exactly it's set up once a definitive plan comes in. I believe that space is around 80 to 100 feet. So
Okay.
it's very deceptive, especially seeing the proposed FW Webb building being the size of a small planet. And those 48-unit buildings, they look like little potato chips on there, but there is a good space in there, and we'll definitely show that more on definitive subdivision plan when it comes in.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. Is any other questions?
Yeah,
Nelson?
I have some. Tell me the disposition of the fish hatchery property, as I call it. Is that part of this lot altogether in ownership
Yes, it
by Flatley? There's a residential building on that property? What becomes of that? We haven't talked
That
about.
residential building is in relatively rough shape. It's currently being rented out. We've just found out that there may be some issues with the roof leaking, that type of thing. The overall plan is that that house will not be there once this development is done. There's also a large, big garage structure there.
Mhm.
That is going to remain. That'll be used for storage for whether it's for sanding the site or maintaining the lawns or maintaining the walkway, that type of thing. But it'll be used for site-specific maintenance uses.
Okay,
But the house will be raised.
I don't think that's indicated on, is that indicated on this plan? I
It
couldn't
is
find
not
it.
on this plan, no.
No. The raising of the house is not on the plan, or the house is not on the
Or the
plan?
continuation of the garage?
The continuation of the garage
the-
is on.
They're all on the plan.
Yeah, they're all on the plan, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the house is located within the open space area. A plan of this size, it's, difficult to
Yeah,
detail
well,
all
that's
the
what I thought.
elements
I
in
hardly
great length.
count a house as part of open space. It just, my own view of it, I think you've stretched your so-called open space concept with this zigzaggy, funny little leg that extends down in to, I think is unusual, to say the least, for open space.
We did want to
configuration.
take advantage of the natural features that are out there, and I think once that area is, it's really not in too bad a shape now, but I think once it's cleaned up and, there's actually a driveway that comes through the St. Gobain space. Let's do that for you for a sec. Is that working? Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Yeah, there's a path that comes through here, and it actually loops around, and it goes to the house, which is right here. Once this FW Webb parcel is conveyed, which we are still under the assumption that it is, things seem to be moving along quite well with them. There's a chunk of that path that we'll probably discuss about whether we keep it and turn it into a walking path, or if we rip it up and put lawn down and relocate a walkway in that area, that type of thing.
So that property hasn't been conveyed. Why the leg that goes up and sort of dead ends there? What's the purpose of that?
This area here,
Yeah.
that's an excellent question. Initially, that leg did not exist. And in the process of the design of the FW Webb site, they found that they needed more area to address their drainage requirements. And ultimately, if anything to the south, there's some slopes that they would have to contend with, and then they're within the shoreline protection setbacks in this area as well. So the only place that they could really address stormwater for, let's say, this southern portion of the site was up in this area after they went through their due diligence and preliminary design stage. So they came back to the Flatley company and said we need more area. And ultimately, that configuration is basically, you know, follows the area that they need to address their drainage on the site.
What they have now is conceptually drawn up, and I know there have probably been some preliminary calculations done, and nothing right to the number. They seem to think that area would shrink. If so, we would retain that and make it more of the green space. If they could go underground, I don't know if that's possible for them in that area. That's another option of getting rid of that open area.
Do they outfall to the brook?
It would be a retention basin.
Yeah, with an overflow to the brook? or
The
something?
overflow would go to the brook, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my understanding from what I've seen from them, yeah.
Okay, it's just an odd-looking thing with the little point there and the little...
Yeah, that wasn't there not too long ago, and they came back and
It's the first I've seen it.
said we need a little more room, so.
Yeah,
I mean, naturally, we're gonna try to get them to work and try to shrink things down as much as they can to leave,
Mhm.
a little more open space.
So will there be a footpath crossing the brook?
It wouldn't cross the brook. It would, Chad will point it out. There's an open space, there's an end of the pond there, and the brook actually starts maybe 200-300 feet,
Right.
right about there.
Okay.
So there's an open area in there that people could easily walk through. So a walking path would definitely be put in that area.
Does it cross the brook or the pond somewhere, the path?
It doesn't cross the actual brook itself or the pond itself. It crosses in between the two. Oops, sorry.
Excuse me, how does, the water comes from across the street, so there's a flow of water through there, and a brook, it's been dammed in a couple places to make the ponds. Can people walk from one side of the pond to the
Yes.
other? And if so, where's the bridge crossing?
There is no bridge. Currently, the outfall from the pond is here, and
There's a
it
pipe.
goes subgrade in daylights here, and this is where the brook starts.
So there's an underground pipe
So
from the
this-
pond to the river,
Existing.
Right.
existing. So you can,
Okay.
they drive
Yeah.
over it now, you can
Yeah.
walk over it, you wouldn't even know it was there if you're
Yeah.
out there.
So the path will cross on that?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, okay. I personally would be looking for some pedestrian uses in this site to blend in. I don't know if you've got a sidewalk along Route 3 or not. Couldn't tell from the plan. Looked like maybe, but it's not clear. But at any rate, I would like to see pedestrian accessibility from the residential to the commercial. I mean, that's the idea of tying all of this together and making a planned unit development of this kind, is to keep all of these services together and to make them walkable and make them easier to get to without impacting traffic.
Right.
To that end, I wonder why the restaurant is parked at the very far end, as far away from the residences as you can get it. And there seems to be no access to the existing restaurant, which is right there on the corner of your property, which might attract some pedestrians. So I would like to see pedestrian connections to those things, and I'd rather see the restaurant move, to be honest, but,
I think at the very least, next meeting, we'll come in with at least a walkway on there.
yeah.
And we've talked about what you just spoke about with the restaurant also,
Yeah,
maybe having a little more centralized.
yeah, that would make it a little more attractive to people.
Bizarre to have it on the other side of the industrial.
Yeah, you'd have to walk through the industrial to get to the restaurant, and a distance at that. Okay.
One of the questions and topics that I think would be good to maybe address this evening is in reviewing the minutes of the April 15th meeting, there seemed to be some comments pertaining to putting a sidewalk along Daniel Webster Highway, and then there was some regarding making the pedestrian connection internal to the site. And we would prefer it to be internal to the site and then maybe come out towards Daniel Webster on Highway on each end. But it would be good to get some feedback from the board on what your stance is on that.
I didn't see it in the plan at all right now, and I would like to see it.
Right, so, and we'd be happy to show it, but it would be nice to have this dialogue so that we show it correctly, I guess.
Yeah.
Be the
Okay,
best
I think
way
we
to
can give you that dialogue today. I want to let everybody have their comments and questions and get a little public input, and then there's a couple of things on my list too, but I want to hear from the public before then. I don't know, Nelson, needed more?
Well, yeah, back to the lot line issue. You talked about, you said something that the lot lines, there aren't separate lot lines right now, I guess, or are there separate lot lines among these different potential users, or it's one property now? And
It's one
it's got-
property, and I believe that is allowed in the regulations. It says
Mhm.
subdivision and/or site plan. But, you know, with the feedback and dialogue that's been had with, you know, with staff, and through our internal discussions, you know, we felt maybe it would make sense to, you know, subdivide this or show a potential subdivision of the property. But in doing so, we would like to seek relief from those common interior, you know.
I don't think this board can grant the kind of relief you're looking for. I think it's a zoning issue. If you're talking about setbacks, I believe they're in the zoning.
I think the staff memo actually makes reference to the board being able to
During this process.
make that relief during this process, and the zoning administrator was actually the individual that we had talked to prior to making this
Yeah,
request.
Within a CUP with relation to a boundary that's created as a part of the CUP, like an internal boundary,
Yeah.
I think that relief may exist. If you're talking about relief
do,
to some of the external parcels, you'd be, or anything that wasn't part of the CUP, I don't know that, I think Nelson's
Yeah.
right, you'd be going to the zoning
Yeah.
board for that relief.
Yeah. So, watch out at St. Gobain there, with the St. Gobain properties.
Potentially, I mean,
Yeah, which is external now, yeah.
I wouldn't, in my day job, I don't tell people, no, don't work so hard to avoid getting a variance from the zoning board if a variance from the zoning board is a reasonable thing. I mean, go get it and stop trying to work
Well,
around it.
just know what you're in for, I
Yeah.
guess that's what I'm saying to these people.
Sure,
Yeah. Water and sewer, have water and sewer been consulted on this? Have we talked to them about capacities for both?
I don't know, Donna, has there been any official communication with the water and sewer departments?
Not in great detail at this point. They're
Just-
aware of the project, but
They're aware of the project, they're aware of the main sizes, they're aware of the capacities, and there is substantial capacity in the water and sewer for this project. What we did discuss with the water department was, and we'll obviously discuss a little further with them as this moves through, as well as the FW Web project, is the process of, they'd like to loop it, and the looping, while it's not etched in stone how it's going to be done, we can pretty much guarantee you that there's going to be a loop through this project of a water line, whether it loops through the FW Web parcel and then up where, in between the pond and the river and then over across. But there's talk about actually connecting over to Allen Road, which is a paper street. That's an unbuilt roadway. Somebody's got a shed in it, which is fine.
Where's the paper street?
It's right there.
Oh, okay.
And again, any construction there would be strictly for a water line. We're not talking about clearing it out or building a cul-de-sac or anything like that. It would just be connecting a water line through there. And again, that's going to be based on further discussion with the water department.
Okay, so you have given that some,
Absolutely, yeah.
you are getting some kind of a green light from them. I think
Yes.
we'd want to see that.
Yeah, we
somewhere along the
didn't
line.
hit
Yeah.
any red lights with any of the department. We spoke, Donna was there. We met with, it was like a small army of people. It was really good to have. A lot of times, we're meeting board to board or department to department, and it's nice to get everybody into one big room and get it done, which we were able to do 3 times, at least, anyway, to discuss this, and no red flags really came up. just a desire to loop it
Yeah.
through, and, which we'll just obviously further discuss with them as we work through this.
Okay. Well, I don't know, the CUP, CUP, does that require an approval from them or I mean,
I
just a
think it
concept?
does.
I think it does. Somewhere or other, we'll need something from them, saying that
Yep.
they've got this covered.
And if it's not in the CUP, then
It
I
ought
think
to be.
this board's usually inclined to see a development
Yeah.
agreement between applicants with a CUP in the town, and it would be part of that.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't,
Okay.
That was actually in in the staff review, there was
One of the
something
criteria.
mentioned about an agreement. So one way or the other, we're obviously willing to do
Yeah.
one or the other.
we'll address that.
And the one other question I had to do with the architecture. You said there was no common architecture right now. And I wondered if you had any particular objections to some form of common architecture. I don't mean they all gotta look exactly alike, but some theme that carries through here that perhaps ties this development together architecturally.
A similar type of architecture between, say, the residential and the retail
And
and
the
so on.
and the
Sure.
restaurant and all of that, yes.
I mean, I don't think it's anything
Yeah.
I don't think it's anything we're opposed to. It's just it might be one of those things that, I don't know if you can see it. I'm gonna just, this is a rendering of the apartments, that have, the 4-story apartments that have been constructed or are under construction, in Nashua, so they're gonna be very similar to that. Colors may be a little different, that type of thing. I guess my point is, when we get into the retail portions of this, and we strike a deal with a retail carrier, whoever it might be, they may have their own type of color schemes or signage and that type of thing. And my fear of just outright agreeing to something like that at this point is, I think it's our wish as well as your wish to see this developed, obviously fully, which we'd all like to see. I'd hate to see somebody back out because they don't want to match colors, I guess is really my point. We could definitely suggest it to them. We could.
Yeah, I think
Ask 'em
overall, I
that-
mean, it's a discussion we should have here tonight, but we should also think about it in terms of the whole project, because the concept of a CUP is that it's master planned. Master planned means that you thought about all the pieces
Right.
as they'd come together. And I understand that you don't know who all the tenants are going to be, and I don't necessarily want to put us in a position where we're turning away developments because of architectural standards. But on the other side of the coin, I don't know that a red and white TGI Fridays on the corner necessarily fits in with any part of a master plan.
I agree.
And we'd be telling TGI Fridays, I appreciate your thematic design for your building, but you gotta make it fit in with the neighborhood.
Right. And it's
kind of
definitely done other places. You see, Dunkin' Donuts changing their facade in different cities
Yeah.
and towns and so on, so. I guess you're saying there'd be some sort of groundwork laid for the type of either architecture or color scheme.
Sure,
to
and I
some-
don't know
To some
that,
degree.
I don't know that the board sort of lays that out, but within the concept of something that's master planned, they ought to look like they all belong together. That
Right.
somebody thought about these things together. So.
Exactly.
And obviously, no restaurant looks like that. That's an apartment building. But the roof lines or the shapes of the landscape and the layout, whatever signage is around, can make it look like it all belongs together. Lots of different ways to tie it together. What's that?
Types of windows.
Types of windows, yes.
Roof lines.
But I agree with you that I don't think it's this board's intention to jam you up where you've got a perfectly good potential tenant who's going to get turned away
Right.
because of such a strict view of architecture. But on the other side of the coin, again, no big boy with a hamburger statue. Happen.
You can cross that one off the list then, I guess.
Big bucket of chicken.
Chicken buckets, yeah. No.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Nelson, did you have more?
I think I'm okay for now.
Stan, I saw you were trying to make some comments in the middle.
Yeah,
There.
now it's time to talk about parking. You brought up the point of 1.25.
Somebody
I
hit
think
Stan's
that
microphone
came
for him.
out in 1940, when cars weren't very popular. And all developers want to use that, and, because it's a nice number and they could cut down on the parking spaces. But I've talked to people who live in developments that have 1.25, and their major problem is parking. They don't have enough parking for themselves. I will ask, I was a little lazy, I didn't add everything up, but how many parking spaces do you have on here?
By the residential or altogether?
Residential, no, just residential, that's all I'm talking about.
I added them up. They have 720 spaces, which is 3 per unit.
720 spaces.
Which is the zoning, which meets the current zoning requirement.
Are you counting in the 45 spaces
No.
that go to the clubhouse?
No.
Okay, because, and do you have public parking for visitors?
I mean, 3 parking spaces per unit
Should
is
be-
accounting
Well,
for.
if you, I'll tell you this, if you have 3 parking spaces per unit, I'm happy with that. That's not a problem. It's just that if you have the exact number that you need to meet the regulations, there's no room for a visitor or somebody that's having a party. And the other thing I want to know is you've been doing everything very good, following the rules and regulations, but I want to make sure that the parking spaces are full size, minimum of 18 feet,
They are.
because I've been involved with some that a full-size car is sticking out into the street. And if you have it here, the way the parking is set up, people wouldn't get through. So that's all I'm interested in, is having enough parking and not using a 1.25.
Now, the 1.25 is from your regulations. It says 1.25 per bedroom plus 0.5 per dwelling unit. That's in your regulations.
Yes.
The number that I threw out was 1.8, is typically where most of these facilities end up being. And the benefit of, working with the John J. Flatley Company is they keep all their facilities, so they actually have a pretty good pulse on what the requirements are for their facility. And we're looking at 1.8 as the requirement, or let's say 2 for round numbers, and we're providing over 3. I mean, that's over 250 extra parking spaces that we could at least get approved and show you that could be built on the plan or in the project, but only build them if they're needed.
Well, the thing.
Well, Chad, let me help you out a little bit too, because
Yeah.
when it comes to the parking on this, I think that you won't find consensus on the board. The comments that you heard last time with not paving the world and cutting down the parking were from me. You heard Desiree's comments a little earlier about doing some more creative things with the parking. And so, as an applicant, I don't mean to put you in that difficult position, but you got to measure as you develop your proposal where you think the votes are going to lie on the board, because Stan and I are going to go in opposite directions. If you wanted to do half as much parking as you had here and it was done creatively, I think that I would be listening with my ears perked up to how you were going to do that. I think that's the trend in multifamily development. It's the trend in walkable communities. It's the trend in some of the latest in planning objectives, is to not pave the world, not block off all the access that the rainwater has to the ground, build the things closer together so people can walk between them. And that's where my view would be. I think that there are a significant population of people who are seeing less and less cars. Statistically, measurably, young people are turning away from driver's licenses, not in huge numbers, but in little bits of numbers that make differences in 300 unit spaces. So with that, I don't satisfy me or satisfy Stan. There's going to be a disagreement among the board in terms of
I don't think
goes.
we'd necessarily be requesting a waiver for the number of parking spaces. I think what we'd be requesting from the board is that, why don't you let us build 1.8 or 2 parking spaces per unit? It'll be designed, the drainage will be designed for the full 3, and let's see how it goes. And if it turns out we need parking spaces, we'll be the first ones to notice that, and we'll be the first ones to get it done.
We've taken that approach with other developments in the past, not on this scale, but when there's 5 or 10 extra spaces that might be built in the future. And I'd be open to listening to the presentation of it as well. The question that I would have is how you would objectively measure when you needed that extra parking and it had to be built, so that you don't have tenants who say that we need parking, and the owner says, well, there's always a space open over there, and you needed parking that should have been built, and nobody ever making that decision to go out and actually put shovel into the ground 2 years after the residential's been built. If you know what I mean.
I mean, the best I can give you on that is this is going to be the same type of community like's been mentioned that we have in Nashua, and with 1.8 spaces per unit.
Well, I think that'll work, but if you're going to
to
have contingent spaces, you got to be real clear on what triggers that contingency to
understand,
build the
yeah,
new spaces.
gotcha.
Yeah, no, I think that the lower number, it's probably, you guys have the experience. It's consistent with some of the other developments.
If we've got 20 residents coming in saying, we need some more spaces, then we'll go and we'll build another, 20, 25, 30 spaces in that general area, if that's where the big complaint is. I mean, obviously, people's situations are different. They might have a couple more visitors or family or whatever,
No, I think that kind of contingent approach is perfect. It just needs to be clear as to
Right.
what triggers that contingency so that it's measurable and objective.
I just have one last question, and I agree, because some of us think of the residents, others think of ecology and the grass, and let's cut out the parking. But the thing, will those be assigned parking spaces?
They are not typically assigned.
Okay.
This may change slightly. In Nashua, we do have garages that people will rent out basically as part of their rent. Those would be the only assigned areas.
That's good. Thank you.
That's good. Tom, you have any comments or questions?
Yes, thanks. I wanted to add my concern about the green area of the common space, if you will. That it doesn't seem to be appropriate to the residential when it's wrapped up right next to the big box and things like that. I understand the intent of trying to connect it to the retail, and we spoke last time you were here a lot about connectivity between the residential and the retail, and that big box sitting right in the middle is making it very difficult and somewhat painful from my perspective to even begin to conceive of that being common space for the residents when they're looking at the back of something that seems like a Home Depot or something like that. So to be right up within 5 feet of it or something seems a little disingenuous to me. So I'm concerned about that and obviously the funny shape and how all that's going to work out. When we talked last time, we also talked about walkways through there, but also a concern about vehicular traffic. I know that there's one desire to keep connectivity through there to avoid any commercial or retail traffic through the residential area, but on the other hand, you've got one point of access for 240 units and a long road there, and in the mornings when they're all going off to work or something like that, that could be a choke point and an issue. And I would like to see, just from a safety perspective, another egress or ingress for that space, just to not be locked into that one entrance.
We have reviewed this with the fire department many times, probably 3 or 4 times. They didn't have too much of an issue with the entrance so much. They did have an issue with having multiple exits out of parking lots. So you can see as it comes down, I guess the north side, which is the right-hand side of the apartments, there's a road that basically goes all the way through. That's something they requested, and it also loops around and goes around the other side of the buildings. Now there was also discussion that if there's a connection that doesn't necessarily need to be made for through traffic, can we shrink that down to maybe 14 feet wide instead of 24 feet wide, strictly for emergency access? To provide obviously a little bit more tree space or grass space, but also giving the emergency vehicles enough access to get to where they need to get going. I think when all is said and done with all of this, I think we're going to see multiple paths to get in there now, because currently right now, where the sewer line comes through the property, which would be the bottom right-hand corner of the big box, then it runs down into the apartment area. That's drivable. That's currently drivable. And emergency access is can be achieved through that route currently. That's been discussed with the fire department. The last thing that we discussed with the fire department is coming off the back end of the apartment area to get down to the railroad. Apparently they've had some issues accessing the railroad in different areas, and there's been brush fires due to the train going by or that type of thing. So we'll also be providing an access for the fire department at the back end of the apartments to give them access to the railway system.
And that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I guess I'm more concerned with the residences and stuff. And when I first moved to town, just if you allow me just
Please.
a moment
Yes, sir.
anecdotally, Wasserman Park, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with at all, on
Little
the
bit.
other side of Merrimack, is a walking-only park. And so the lake and the beachfront and everything is quite a distance from the parking lot. And everybody that I talked to said, well, everybody needs exercise. That's a great thing. But there are a lot of moms with kids in strollers. There's a lot of other people that have difficulty walking that want to be able to enjoy that lake but can't get down there because there's no parking and there's no ability to vehicularly transport down there. And what I'd like to see here in the idea of a community or a planned unit development here, if you will, or a CUP, that the residences can get to the retail without having to get in their car and go out on DW Highway and come back in another entrance and go to that, or to go to that restaurant, or to go to work at the
Right.
industrial facility or something like that. And a walkway through there is nice, and I think it's a great thing to have. But I don't think we can only depend upon people walking to get there because there's inclement weather and there's winter time and there's other things that are going to make that very difficult. And so having to go out through that one exit to DW Highway, go down DW Highway and come back in again is just going to be a difficult, cumbersome thing to do. And I'd like to see some more internal connectivity, drivable connectivity, to try and help to pull this whole thing together as a community, if you will. And that's what I tried to bring up last time, and it doesn't look to be addressed here at all.
We did go back and discuss it, and it's kind of a weight between, I don't want to use the word isolate because it's not the word I want to use, but
Yeah.
separating the apartments and not allowing, if there's 200 people at the retail store or however many retail stores end up in there, we don't want them accidentally going into the apartment complex and driving through the apartment complex. That was really the basis behind this type of layout. The other part of it was talking with the traffic engineer and making sure that this would work traffic-wise. For a lot of the reasons you said, emergency access-wise, that's why we had discussion with police and fire. Or I should say fire. We didn't have a whole lot of discussion with the police. And just egress time, coming in, coming out, that type of thing. And part of the traffic report is there will be some work that will need to be done on DW Highway. Not a ton, maybe some widening and some lanes, turning lanes so people can get out easily, get in easily, and allow through traffic to continue on DW Highway, that type of thing. So that has been looked at, and maybe I'm thinking maybe next time might be a little better, and this time I can really get into more detail on that.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's some of my concerns. And then as Nelson expressed, the restaurant on the other side of the industrial park just
Yeah.
seems kind of
Remote.
different.
Remote.
Remote, yeah. Okay, that's
Got to be really hungry to get there.
yeah, I mean, unless it's a great lunch place for people that are working during the day or something like that.
Yeah.
To be able to walk over to.
Yeah.
But 200 seats or whatever it is for an industrial place seems like a bit much.
I want to pick up on something that Tom had mentioned and Nelson had mentioned, and it's part of your presentation, but with respect to the open space that you're using to calculate density, which is what's shown on the plans you handed to us and the one that you flipped over where there's a green area, that odd configuration with the flag coming all the way across and down behind the other does seem to be a little bit unusual. But the point of that space, or the point of that map as I take it, is to show the land area that you're using to calculate density. And maybe we can help you with some conversation today address that, because while the flag lot that kind of comes underneath the other one seems really odd as a calculation, I don't have a problem with the density that you've chosen. And if it takes giving you a waiver to allow increased density but on a more ordinarily shaped lot, I wouldn't have a problem doing. I don't know if other members of the board would have a problem doing that. But drawing something that essentially zigzags through the whole place in order to aggregate enough land just seems, if it was a political district, we'd call it gerrymandering. Why do that? There's, in my view, I don't have a problem with putting this number of residential units on that much space. Like to see less parking around it. Whether you do that with a calculation that has the square plot of land, or whether you ask for us to allow you a higher density, I don't have a problem with either one of those approaches. Now, what you're showing on this map in green space is just undeveloped land. Whether you call it open space or that it's going to be recreational use for somebody or not, it's just land that doesn't have anything built on it. And that is a completely different concept than the space that you're using to calculate your residential density.
Right.
And so that's what I wanted to offer for some input on that. Mike, you had some comments?
Yeah, I guess, the original meeting in April talked about more vision than I was expecting that's presented here, more of a campus style, some more connectivity. I think that's already been discussed. I don't want to go over that too much again. But just, I guess I'm overall looking to trying to find ways to make less of an impact. I think the site is actually a heavy impact. In other words, you've got a fairly large industrial use, and then you've kind of tried to work some of this other stuff into it. And I like the concept, but it's a heavy impact. And I'd like to see, the way that you utilize, the creative low-impact development design concepts to maximize your open space and create connectivity between these parcels. And ultimately create curb appeal and attraction. One of the things that I said in the April meeting was that this really will serve as one of those kind of gateways into the community. And it's got to look great. And it's got to be a destination spot, just to some degree like Budweiser is. And I think it has that potential. The parts and pieces I think we're talking about, I think we're working through some of those, but I don't see them quite yet, and I'm not comfortable yet with all the details here. So the concepts about similar architecture, less parking, being a little bit more creative with lot sizing, all make sense to me. But I'd like to see more detail and work through that with you as we move forward.
Thanks for that comment. I don't know if I'm putting off for later what we should discuss today, but in terms of some of those details, I was always looking at this and saying we're going to see site plans for each one of these little pieces at one point, and the layout of the apartment buildings might be completely different in a site plan. I think dimensionally, the swimming pool that you have drawn on there is probably 100 feet by 75 feet, the way that it's drawn there, and it probably won't be that big of a pool when you build it. So I've always looked at some of those details as being things that we get down into those weeds on a site plan level. But as an applicant, do you need to hear more of that stuff from us in terms of what we want to see now, or are you thinking that the way that these buildings are laid out is the final idea? Because I can tell you with the big box, I wouldn't want to see a big parking field in front of a building. I'd tell you got to do something more creative with that parking, whether it surrounds the building or it's broken up with islands or green spaces or something. But what looks like 3 acres of parking in front of a 3-acre building probably in the site plan I'd want to see come forward.
No, I think I agree with you 100%. This was shown to show that this will work. We have enough parking spaces.
It's almost like a yield plan to me. It's almost like a yield plan would
pretty
be
much. Yeah, but I am in agreement that when we get into specific site plans, that things will be a little more, obviously more detailed. But obviously, we'll take into account everything's been mentioned here. The low-impact design is something, especially on a site like this, is something I've been discussing for over a year. That the soils out there are super for a low-impact design. If we can get all the numbers to work out, that would be my personal preference, is to do an LID. It's really just about custom made for it. We are in a couple of, we're in a watershed protection area, we're in a wellhead protection area. That's all been discussed with the department heads also at the previous meetings that we've had with town departments. That said, I think that would still work. But again, that's something that we're not prepared to get into specifically, right now, given your calculations at this point. Obviously we want to get through this, and as we get into the individual site plans, take this into account. So I'm happy talking about it now.
Yeah, just an idea that popped into my head when you talk about wellhead protection area, and I know this is probably one of those details that you're expecting to address later, but because we've had an issue with it in the past, this board would be looking at no salt or low salt or alternate ice melting anywhere in a wellhead protection area and probably everywhere on the site. Lynn?
This was actually that was one of the points brought up at one of the department head meetings, at least in the wellhead protection area, which basically extends to the right-hand side of the FW Webb and cuts right down the middle of the St. Gobain. So everything to the left of that would be in that wellhead protection area.
Okay.
That's what that curved line is.
That's what
Right.
that's what that curved line represents.
Lynn, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm going back to your comment earlier about a master plan. And when I look at what you've presented here, I see 4 individual developments. I see the one way over on the right. I see the small retail area, I see the big box, and I see the residential, and I don't see them tied together. The green goes all around them, but I really don't see a consolidated plan. They really each seem to stand alone. And I'd like to see more connectivity.
Through roadways?
It may
or-
be roadways, it may be pedestrians, it may be architecture, it may be
Right.
the theme, it may be a lot of
Definitely.
things, but it needs to look like it was master planned.
Agreed.
I see 4 individual developments.
Our goal was to obviously phase it from the single families located on Lantern Lane, and work our way into, have the industrial either towards the tracks or further to the north side, and have the retail along the roadway, so it's easily visible, it's marketable, it's attractive to people driving by and coming through Merrimack. But
I understand that, and I totally agree with that. I just want to see it more, I want it to appear more as a complete project rather than 4 unique projects, which is the way it is viewed by me.
Right. The geometry of the project is somewhat unique.
Yeah.
With all of the elements. So,
Mhm.
I think the architecture and maybe the pedestrian connectivity is certainly attainable. But when you start contemplating the St. Cobain property, and we only have so much space in here, and we've already tried to position the buildings so that they hide the parking some in that area. Anyways, we worked on reconfiguring the parking from what I believe the plan was back in April. When we were brought on board, we did work on that. We also worked on the layout of the apartment some, but I think mainly we were trying to address comments from the fire department. But there's certainly a theme to the feedback that we're getting this evening, and we'll take that into consideration and try to build upon it. A vehicular connection of some kind through here could be difficult because there's the 2 ponds there. So I just want to make sure that there's an understanding, that we probably won't be showing a connection between those 2 retail spaces, especially since the FW Webb parcel is continuing to need additional space. Now, if they come back and run their final numbers and find that they need less space, and maybe we can work something in here, we definitely can address a pedestrian connection to all the elements. And that was something that Kevin and I have discussed at length, and it's certainly something that is the intention is for it to be on the plan. One of the reasons why it's not shown on this plan is because when we reviewed the minutes from the April 15th meeting, there was some discussion as to, is it supposed to be along the DW highway or can it be internal? And we would prefer it to be internal. We felt we were so close to this evening's meeting, it would make sense to have that dialogue rather than making a change to the plan at that time.
I can offer you my own thoughts on the sidewalk. I don't mind seeing the internal sidewalk. We've just got to somehow cross the bridge of making that sidewalk that's internal to your site a public way, which means that the whole town can use it, not just the people who live here or want to shop here. If they want to just get from the Homestead Restaurant to the bowling alley, they're going to use your sidewalks, and that there's some reasonable way to get from one end to the other.
Yep.
So.
There's a quick comment. You know, thinking about that, I'm wondering if there's some sort of, again, going back to kind of making this a destination point, think about, you know, if there's an attractive feature, you know, sometimes they'll use a historic element to do that for the space. You know, think about people being able to go to a center point. You know, if that pond can be turned into something that's more, you know, ornamental, it has lights, that, you know, that it would bring people down there to enjoy their ice cream, you know, after whatever shopping or something. Maybe that ties into this public space that we're talking about. Maybe it's a small little park or something like that, a pocket park or something. But when you said that, Bob, that's what kind of hit me and tied everything together.
I think that that's a good element. I think that you could also consider with the small retail that's between the restaurant and the big box, you could consolidate that parking into one area and make that more of a walking effort to get from shop to shop, with architecture and pocket park type features, benches and things, and not necessarily cozy parking right up to the front door of every building, so that people go, you know, car to car.
That's cool.
You know.
And
Yeah, I got the impression, more or less from everybody at last meeting, it wasn't confirmed, that we weren't really looking, we were agreeing with you and not looking at an outside sidewalk, but an internal sidewalk. That, because you're going to have retail stores, and not everybody likes to get out on the road and jog, but they like to exercise. And if you have the walkway inside, it'll help immensely. But, you know, it has to be figured in, because one or the other. And right now, I like the internal myself, so that people can use it.
Yeah, I agree with Stan. I think that was what we discussed last time in internal, but it does need to be connective and useful for the town in general, not necessarily something that's only good for this one site.
And just to touch back on when you guys were here last, there was discussion made back to kind of the history of the site, as the previous civil engineer had mentioned, with it, the fish hatchery and that, and maybe, you know, that could be kind of the, I won't say like a theme, but you can kind of use that to tie the site together. Because it would be really cool. You've already got the ponds right there in the center. If that ends up being kind of the gathering place to the site, it seems appropriate at that area that would be a gathering place.
Yeah, we agree. That's pretty much, since we've been out of the site, that pond and the former fish hatchery area has really been eyeballed for the longest time as a good gathering place. Whether people live there or they're shopping there, you know, they can park their car, take a walk, you know, grab an ice cream or a sandwich or something, and hang out there. So yeah, we agree with what you're saying completely.
I have
Stan?
one little question. In your other developments that you have in Nashua, would you know how much play the tennis courts got? Is it really worth the land that you're giving up for tennis courts? Because I was thinking of like a little kid's playground or a tots type thing versus that.
There's a couple. I'm gonna split this into two things. What I've seen of the tennis court so far, and I'm not up there all the time. I'm in Braintree and the sites in Nashua. I am up there 2, 3, 4 times a week, but it's usually during the day. I don't know how often it's used at night. It does get use. It doesn't get a ton of use that I can see, but people are on it today. I see people on it, you know, in the morning. I see people on it. They're on vacation, that type of thing. And while I tend to agree with you with the playground, with these apartments being 1 and 2 bedroom, we have 180 apartments that are currently up and filled. We've got another 388 that are under construction. We got 40-something people moving in less than a month. I think there's 5 kids.
Yeah, I was just looking at a paved area versus a grassed area. And this is a mixed use, all ages. It's not just.
Are you thinking playground? Are you thinking basketball courts? Or?
No, I'm not thinking of basketball. I just, someplace where there's a little bit more open ground and little kids that aren't in school maybe yet, or after school. So.
We do have a playground shown on the.
Yeah, we did peg a, and it's a good sized area. I think it's.
Oh, yeah, I see the playground.
Yeah, there is a little playground area there. It does have good distance off of the neighbors over on Lantern Lane. It's not overly big because, again, with the Nashua development, a school bus pulls in, they pull out with, I see like 3 heads on the bus, and that's it. So.
I think also this may sound a little bit strange, but pools and tennis courts, playgrounds, open space, green space, walking paths have an aesthetic value that will help you fill your properties and use them even by people who will never go play tennis. They just like the idea of having a place with amenities.
Yeah, right.
And even if they don't go and use that particular amenity, they've got a place that's got amenities. And there's, I don't know, it's weird. There's an intangible value to it.
There is, yeah.
That helps you rent your space, rent your residentials. Even, I don't know about looking at the back of the big box and how much that helps, but it's got some space. You know, movie theater would be a good use for 180,000 square feet there. You'd be the most popular place in town if you could find a movie theater that wanted to go there. So. And people could walk down to get an ice cream after.
One of the other things that probably is not germane at this point because it's the master plan, but just the layout and whatnot, I would think you'd want your play facilities and whatnot down more internal to the apartments instead of all up against DW Highway. Maybe there they have the aesthetic view and draw people in, but anybody that's going to use it from within those apartment complexes is going to get in their car to drive out there because it's a long haul from that back building.
But it is
But it's-
buffering
But it's the,
residences from
it's
the
the
highway.
right, it's the buffering, and it's also the appearance when you pull into the project. I mean, the
Yeah.
clubhouse is always
Mm-hmm.
typically what you see. I mean, and if you've been to, I invite you to go to Nashua and take a look at, some of that development. The clubhouse is very nice. The pool area is very nice. And I think, similar to what was just stated, the amenities, whether you plan on using them or not, sometimes that appearance does sell the project. So if that is the case, you typically try to put that relatively close to the entrance so that everybody can see it. We do believe that there is, still a fair amount of buffer, from the clubhouse area in the pool area, to the highway. And as a plan is formalized, there will certainly, I can promise you, there will be a pretty good landscaping plan that will enhance that area and the entrance and the appeal of the project.
But
Part of the difficulty, I mean, a lot of the comments that we hear are ultimately going to be part of this plan. They were going to be part of this plan. And I think the challenge is how much work do you do up front? And I think we get a pretty good idea now that this board's looking for more work in the conditional use permit stage. We were anticipating a lot of these details to be handled during a site plan process. And frankly, the residential aspect would be the first site plan process that we would be going through.
That approach makes a lot of sense, and hopefully the feedback we're giving you takes away some of the anxiety you'd have in investing that work because we're giving you the answers you'd need to develop it. How far, you got a good 1,500 feet between the bottom residential building and the clubhouse pool. It's a little bit far for people to make regular use of it with their kids, but
It's a good distance, but we have those same distances on a lot of the facilities that we've
We're
worked on.
about
And
yeah.
the trail system actually is the nice tool, of getting you to the amenity. A lot of times, we'll have a walking trail that'll go along the perimeter and pop out, at the clubhouse or the site amenities. And those do get a lot of use in Nashua.
Yeah, John Flatley just finished building, I think it's little over 10,000 feet of 8-foot wide walkway, bikeway. Wasn't part of any permitting requirements. It was something he wanted to do for the residents that were there. Went from industrial park, which is what it was, started building the apartments, and he's been working hard to get that thing resident friendly, which has really been turning out super. I think what I'm going to do too is I'll get some pictures of the Nashua site, and I'll try to get those up to the board, just so you get an idea of the type of landscaping. I mean, I've been engineering for too long, 20 plus years, and I'm not saying this just because I work for him, but I've never seen somebody take so much attention to the future residents of the places he's building, and the attention to detail for amenities, whether it are walking trails or landscaping. Nashua's got a electric car charging station. It's got bike rentals that they're key to open their house. They slide it through and a bike pops out and they can ride a bike.
Those things sound terrific. In terms of the master planning stuff we talked about before, think of those commercial uses along DW Highway as part of the amenities. That having a cafe nearby where you could sit outside and read the paper, or have a sandwich, or walk down and get a few items that you need, or get your dry cleaning done, or something like that.
That's really what his mindset was as we drew this up, is, and that's kind of why we talked about trying to get the apartments built initially along with the FW Web building, because the thought is, and this goes back to what's been going on in Nashua, because he also has retail in Nashua that was built, and really until the apartments got built, the retail wasn't getting a whole lot of work, and now the place is just packed. It's just packed like every day, every lunch. It's real busy. So his thought process is, let's get some people in here, and that will attract, whether they're restaurants or retailers or whatever, say, hey, we've got 200 plus people here that, why are they gonna drive a half hour away instead of just walking over here and using us?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. With you. I don't know if any member of the board has more comments. I know that we haven't had an opportunity to hear from the public yet, and I don't know if the folks here have come for your project or the next one. If you guys want to, Tom?
One more comment. The quote-unquote big box in the middle there just seems like the elephant in the room. It breaks the whole project up. And I don't know what's really desired or intent there. If the retail continued through, or the housing merged through there instead of a big box, it would just help to bring that whole project together as a single community, where that thing just kind of looks like a big chunk of something in the middle.
It certainly is the thing that doesn't fit. You'd have a whole lot easier time making a connected, master planned unit if that space was used for more of the kind of retail that's to the right of it in the plan. But I understand the motivation that there's just not a lot of sites left in the world that are amenable to those, and there may be some commercial value to it. I don't know if there is or not, but
It is a challenging site, no question.
so
Okay, thank you.
that does break it up quite a bit to see that there. So, is there anything else you want to hear from us before we open it up for the public comments? We'll give you another chance afterwards. This is the last word.
for now, thank you.
Are there any abutters or citizens who wish to weigh in on the project as the board considers it? Please come forward to, would you like to sit down as you speak, or would that be easier with the microphone?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. There is somewhere a sign-in sheet for you to use. Chad has it. Yes, go ahead and talk first. We'll get it for you in a second. Please don't forget to introduce yourself and then tell us whatever you'd like the board to know.
All right, I'm Sylvia Hunter, 664 Daniel Webster Highway, right across the street from the property. And my question was, if I could ask for clarification, we talked about traffic lights. I'm assuming it's right across from the box, where the box store is?
Sure. The place that they're talking about potentially needing a traffic light is related to that box store. The driveway goes between it and the small retail that's next to it.
And what is directly across the street from where that would be?
I don't know.
I think that might be your place.
The double entrance from the big box store, the two-lane entrance,
On the right of it?
no, Kevin, go right. No, put it back down again, you can see it.
Well, you can see it from this.
The big box,
Right.
that end, right there, that's her place.
Lot 6E2-16?
Yes, that's her
Okay.
place.
And I'm just wondering what impact having a light there is going to have for my access, to the highway. And also, I had another question of, just a comment. For 20 years, I always left my house at 6:25 in the morning to head north to go to work. And if I left at 6:30, I would have to plan on about 8 minutes to get out onto the highway. That same is true if I want to go south when it comes time, about 4:45, 5 o'clock. And because the traffic light at Bedford Road is oftentimes backed up well past the Depot Farm stand. And so I'm just interested to see how this is going to work out as far as traffic is concerned and what impact it's going to have on the properties, for example, the Depot and myself and Labrie and Mr. Hill's property and getting out of our.
It's a good point to raise. We're going to have to watch that all the way through because it'll certainly have an impact on what's going on with your property. Now, the idea that a traffic light has been mentioned there is not the final word on that. I have a feeling that there'll be members of this board who are not necessarily supportive of a traffic light there and maybe looking for a different solution. And I don't know what the right solution is because it's too early to tell, but stick with us and stay attuned to it, and we'll listen to your comments along the way with their comments and make sure we work through those things for you.
And we didn't get a mail notice about this meeting.
Probably because it was continued from a previous meeting. When a meeting of the planning board is continued from one to the next, part of the decision to make the continuance is something that we announce here at the meeting, that there wouldn't be future notice because it's made at the previous meeting. However, if we decide to continue tonight, you'll hear tonight what the next date will be, and if the project is ever not continued to a specific date, then there is new notices that go out.
And there will be. And is the gray area parking in front of the yellow box?
On this plan, it is. I think that my input to the applicant would be that that's not what I would like to see on a final plan.
It really isn't very aesthetic to
Anything?
just see a lot of parking lot
I agree.
off of the highway.
Yes, I agree 100%. I don't like the layout of putting all the parking out in front of the building like that.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and the sign.
Yep, there's a sign-in sheet right there. Thank you for your input. Are there other members of the public who wish to weigh in on this project? Seeing one, none, zero. We'll close the public hearing on this and then wait just a second. We'll confer with you a little bit. There's some other items that I had some comments on. Some of them we've covered and some of them we haven't. I think on my list, we've covered parking. We kind of talked that one to death, that I'd like to see it done a little more creative. We've talked about the residential density and the way that it's calculated. I think that's okay. You mentioned phasing and wanted to talk a little bit about that and wanted to see the residential done as a single phase without any other limitations on it. That's kind of one of my pet peeves on these CUPs, is to see phasing that brings forward mixed use right from the beginning, so that it's always a mixed use development, because that's what a CUP is. It can only exist in this zone by virtue of being mixed. And you've mentioned that we should account for some of that mixed use by giving some credit towards the FW Web development. I guess where I get stuck on that is either FW Web's got to be in the CUP and then you get credit for it, or it's carved out of the CUP and then we don't think about them as being related to each other. So I mean, it's one or the other.
And I think that's become the difficulty of this whole project is ideally we would like it to be part of the CUP, but ultimately it could mean that FW Web doesn't end out, on this property because their time frame can't be subject to the time frame of the conditional use permit process. So I think the best way for them, frankly, is for it not to be part of it. But, the John J. Flatley Company is looking at it as it's on my property. There's got to be some benefit to bringing 1 million square feet of warehouse and office space to the town of Merrimack.
I agree with the approach of paying attention to what the needs of FW Web are in terms of their time schedule, and I would encourage you to make the same decision that you've already made. The question is that when you do that, that essentially cuts it out of the CUP and treats it separately. FW Web could buy that land from you, those 46 acres, and put it on the back burner and never do it. And maybe they do it quickly, maybe they don't. And it may be everybody's intention to do it right now, but it wouldn't be part of a development agreement. It wouldn't be part of phasing. It wouldn't be part of the open space that's shared. And so it's really hard to consider it to be part of it when you've, for important reasons that are valid, deliberately separated it. And I think that if I were you, I would deliberately separate it the way that you've done. But that may mean that you got to think about at least some part of the retail or commercial getting developed at the time that the residential gets done in that first phase. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all or a majority of it, but if you end up in a future plan with the restaurant closer to the residential and the restaurant and residential goes together, at least then we've got enough of a mixed use to say that we've got the concept of a conditional use permit going here. And that's my own 2 cents. There's 6 other board members who may vote me down. Disagree.
Yes.
Stan.
I was under the understanding that FW Web was going to buy the piece of property, and if they bought it, it's not part of the Flatley project.
Right, which is why it's omitted from
Right.
this actual plan at this point.
Yeah.
I know, but you said that Mr. Flatley wants to look at it as his project.
Well,
but
we
it's
would like the
really not.
town to look at it as FW Web would not be building a 1 million square foot warehouse / office area
Yeah,
if
I
John
agree.
Flatley didn't own the land to sell him, I guess, is basically we're just saying, and it was mentioned a little earlier, we'd like to build at least a good number of the apartment buildings to draw in retail. If it works at the same time, even better. Like I mentioned earlier, in Nashua, we built some retail. It kind of sat around a little bit as the apartments got built up. Everything picked right up, and then the place, I can't even tell you how packed the sub shop there is, just nuts. But the thought process is, the apartments will draw retailers as opposed to the other way around. Now, we could build one apartment building and somebody might, retailer might come by and say, wow, who lives around here? And there are residents across the street, but there's not 240 residents across the street.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying, but a lot of that kind of comes back to the idea that it's master planned. And if we're not sure how the pieces work together, that's, I know Nelson, I saw your hand, but Tom had you first.
Just anecdotally, there's a development a little bit north of you, a planned unit development, that built a lot of individual residences and a couple of apartment buildings and had a couple of big commercial buildings. And they came back here and pled to the planning board that they're not able to fill these commercial spaces and they want to turn them into apartment buildings or residential buildings or something like that. So I think my fear is that you're going to build these 5 buildings out there, and then you're going to come back and say, well, I can't sell this big box space, so I need to build in more apartment buildings. And then, the industrial space here is getting eaten up by residential space, and we've missed the use of the whole conditional use permit.
I agree
And
with
so
Tom.
That's where we're wavering here. We're trying to understand, we'd like to see some better
Well,
concept. that-
there is a cap on the number of living quarters that can be built. I think I want to say it's 400 or something along those lines in your regulations. At this point, I mean, there's literally not a single plan whatsoever to do anything other than what we're showing here. There's no desire to put up more buildings. As a matter of fact, we took one out. We initially had 6 buildings in here. Again, due to the FW Web, we weren't looking for a waiver for land area, that type of thing. Again, if the board is willing to do that for configuration purposes for these 5 buildings, that's great. We appreciate it, and I think it will work a little better, as you mentioned. And I've heard a little bit about the history of past developments with just the apartments get built and people take off, and that's the end of it. And everybody's, the builder's happy, and that's the end of that. But it might be tough to convince you otherwise. But that's really not how John Flatley works. I don't really know how else to.
Yeah,
to put
I
it
don't
except
doubt. I don't doubt his intentions, and he's certainly got a reputation for doing things the right way. There's no question about that. But we do have these other experiences where those folks
Right.
had every intention to do it. And in addition to the one Tom's talking about, the next one down from that also has empty commercial lots sitting in front of it that have been approved for several different uses over the years. Still, nobody's put a shovel in the ground. And so it's basically, and in those are planned use developments, not conditional use permits, but they still got supposed to be commercial, retail plus residential, and there's nothing there but residential. For conditional use permits, though, your ability to exist in the industrial zone exists singularly by virtue of being mixed use.
Right.
And so that's why, to me, it's important to be mixed use, at least to some degree, along the path. It doesn't necessarily have to be equal or
Right.
that the other first. And maybe it's something that can be proposed by you guys as a part of what goes into a development agreement, where within a certain period of time after residential, these things will be built, and then you got to figure out, well, how do you make sure that happens? And those kinds of things might be a reasonable proposal. I'm not saying that it has to be exactly at the same moment in time, but there needs to be some assurance that we get to a master planned.
I 100% agree with what you're saying. I do. My fear, and it's not really a fear, to be honest with you, it's just a concern, I guess, is if a developer is sitting or a company owner is sitting behind me right now, which I don't know if there is or not, they may say, well, you're not going to build this 3rd apartment building until you build my building. How much are you going to give it to me for? And all of a sudden,
They've
it's
got
this
all the
much per
leverage
square
on
foot. It's this much per. All right, it's 10 cents per square foot, and then it, kind of makes it.
Understood. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about in terms of what it does to the market value and the leverage that people have that bargain with you. And so, as we work through that going forward, I think we can be sensitive to that idea and making sure we don't put you in that kind of bind. But at the same time, we ought to figure out some way that we can accomplish all of the bases that we're trying to accomplish.
I think, and obviously I'd have to just double check with John, but I think we'd be willing to show you our marketing efforts, and as well as update you, whether it's a 6-month basis or whatever, onto how many people we've contacted, how our discussions have gone, just to show you that an effort is truly be put forth to get that end of it developed. Something along those lines,
Something to think about. I'm not sure what the final decision is or the final construct will be that works. Chad, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was actually going to say, I mean, unlike many companies, the Flatley Company does have their own marketing department. And I can assure you they're very active. There's been a number of, the FW website is kind of part of that. Obviously, that site's unique because it was a large piece, and there probably, there are not many of them left anymore. But they certainly market, and if we, just made a list of all the projects that are going on currently, it's kind of, it's amazing that, you know, the amount of interest they're able to find. So there's a niche there. And, you know, maybe if we can share that information, that would be fine.
It
But
certainly would help to see that kind of information. I'm sure you must appreciate how difficult it is for a board to treat
Sure.
applicants differently based on the promises that they make and the reputations that they have, and that it's very difficult for a board to put a ton of stock in that stuff. But I mean, we'll do what we can as we go forward. Nelson?
Yeah, I just had a thought about, since this is a conditional use permit, could the developer, could you live with the condition that this is approved and so on when the FW Web is constructed? So in other words, make it a requirement that their construction go ahead before you go ahead with yours. I don't know if that's, you know.
Probably something you guys got to take home.
you
and
can't-
digest.
and I don't expect you to
No, I
answer.
just
There's not
think the
gonna be any
FW Web, the FW Web purchase and sale is still in effect. You know, they haven't actually bought the property. That's really my first holdup. The second holdup is, and that building's just huge. I don't know how long it's gonna take them to build that thing. You know,
No,
so,
well,
I
if
mean,
they
really,
pull a
it's a
permit.
it's a timing
If they
thing.
pulled a permit, I think.
Yeah, if they got a shovel in the ground, something
Yeah.
that says that it actually happens, and then at that point, that's
I-
something that gives us the body that we need to a
Yeah.
mixed-use development.
Just
I think that's certainly something we can talk about. I mean, that's-
I would feel a little bit more comfortable just at what you said at the beginning. The restaurant, if you just swap with the property that's next to the big box store, because now it's in where all the traffic is. And, you know, it would be a great tie-in for a good restaurant.
And the restaurant that's shown on there is like a, you know, think of like a Longhorn Steakhouse type box or whatever. And the anticipation is that throughout this, you know, there may be a sub shop, there may be, you know, maybe a local donut shop, there might be, you know, whatever. You know, they're shown as retail at this point, but the anticipation isn't really just to have one big box restaurant there. It's really just shown just for the purpose of this conditional use permit at this point.
I think one of the problems with the Crossroads Path restaurant, it was like too far out and nothing around it. And
Right.
if people come in, put your development in and
Yeah.
have a restaurant, maybe you can sell the big box too. You know, as,
Right.
hey,
Right.
go shopping and then go eat.
There you go.
And then go walk through the fishery.
There you go. We'll work off the meal.
Is there more that you need from us tonight in terms of the project? I know that there's some things that we want to develop. The staff has asked us to consider whether we ought to have a traffic consultant consider this for peer review. I don't know what your thoughts are in terms of
I mean,
that
if that's
proposal.
something the board wants, then, I mean, we submitted a traffic report.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's something you need reviewed, by all means.
The conversations I have with
scrambled that around now, if we're talking about rearranging if we upset the traffic report, I guess that was.
certainly, yeah, that certainly is a question,
Yeah.
is whether you upset the traffic report if we decide that the restaurant goes here and the big box goes there.
I don't think it'll screw it up too much.
The message that I got from staff is that the sophistication of this site it makes the traffic report beyond their comfort level with what they want to review internally, and that's why they've asked the board to consider having a peer review. And I think that the traffic related to this site is going to be very, very important to the community's comfort level with the project and the proposal. So
We agree.
I'd want to see it peer reviewed.
I think so.
Whether that has to happen now or at some later stage, I don't know. I mean, if you guys think that there's significant changes you would make to the layout and you want to see the traffic peer reviewed a little later.
Is it something either the board or the planning department could, I mean, if you already have a traffic review firm that you think you're going to use, is it worth asking them, you know, once you get this, how long is it going to take? I mean, I guess my point is, if we do some readjusting in here and we hold off on doing the traffic review, if the traffic review is going to take 8 months and it takes us 2 months to get through all the revisions, then we'd rather get it started now.
CLD Engineering is the usual peer review firm, and I understand that's the one they'd want to use. On other types of peer review, they're time limited. I think they've got 10 business days after they get the plan and the payment to
Oh,
do
okay.
something. Is that right? Would that same 10 days apply to a traffic study?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the exact 10 days, but it would be a quick turnaround.
Yeah,
It's not
ballpark
8
10,
months
20
or.
days.
Not even
Then, yeah, why don't we hold off?
I think we would, yeah, we'd like to kind of work with staff on that, because certainly if we're shifting things around, it's gonna change
Okay.
how those access points are evaluated.
In terms of the timing of it and when you do it, I think I'm fine letting you work with staff on that. In terms of the decision to have it, I think the staff is looking for the board to make that call here tonight, and I don't know if there's a motion someone would like to make on that.
I'll make a motion to require a peer review for the traffic study.
I'll second it.
Second by Ms. Christensen, made by Counselor Koenig for the benefit of our minute taker who's not.
I'm not here.
Not here.
Is there any discussion on the peer review traffic report? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0 to have peer review look at the traffic study on a timing to be determined by the applicant and the staff based on what might change in the plans. Is there anything else, Donna, that you needed us to work on and address with the
No,
applicant?
I think you addressed all the topics.
Anything you need to hear from us? Anything else any of the board wants to tell the applicant while they're here? Thank you for the presentation. It was very clear and very enlightening in terms of the details. I know that there's a lot to work through in one of these, and it isn't easy to get through. So thank you for working with us.
We appreciate it.
We would just like to request to be continued to the next public
Yeah, there you go.
hearing, please.
Thank you for
To
paying
which one?
attention to the details. To which meeting do you want to be continued to?
You can need it. Within a month.
Yeah,
We have
say-
one in 2 weeks here in August, and then September is probably around the 10th and the 24th, something like that.
Right, September 9th or September 23rd.
Let's do the ninth.
We'd like to be, request to be on the 9th,
On the
September 9th,
9th?
please.
Will someone make such a motion? So moved by Ms. Christensen to continue to the September 9th meeting, second by Ms. Fault. No further public notice. It'll be here in this room at 7:30 PM on September 9th. Any discussion? The only discussion I would offer is between now and September 9th, what do we plan to see happen? Do you plan to get your traffic in order where you want to have a review by then? Do you plan to tweak this layout a little bit and show us something different? Try and do some sidewalks and things like that? Or what
Right,
would-
we'll at least, we'll get a walkway system on there. We'll maybe break those rectangular retail buildings into, this might be a sub shop and so on and so forth, and just kind of maybe show a little slightly different alignment, maybe even move that big box restaurant, as we discussed, over to
Sure.
that second entrance over.
Yeah. I don't know if it would be viable with all that retail that goes from the St. Gobain driveway over to the hatchery, but consolidating the parking and making that kind of a little walking area from shop to shop, I think would be a very attractive proposal.
Okay.
Whether it makes any sense for you guys, you got to sort that one out and tell me about. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Up here can be a problem in the
What's that?
wintertime, but,
Certainly can be. So.
well, I understand. That's a whole nother issue.
Mike?
If, you've got that marketing department, if you could incorporate some of the pictures that you've already got in Nashua and tell that story in a couple pages or something like that as kind of a promo
Yeah.
to this application, I think that will help us bridge what we've gathered here from the drawings.
I was tossing around maybe just having him come in to the next hearing and just
Okay.
maybe kind of walk you through some of the properties and how they go about things and that type of thing.
With that in mind, if that's all that, oh, Tom?
And I guess I'm still hung up on the lack of connectivity between the two sides, if you will, around the ponds. And you delineated where the problem is, and if FW Web has to have that space, I'm sure that's important to you. But having everybody go out to DW Highway to come over and get back in again to get to the space is just a cumbersome difficultness about a conditional use permit. The whole idea is a community or a mixed use here, and what you have is very distinct separate uses. And if there's any way at all you can work to connect all of that through so that they're not having to go to DW Highway to get from one space to the other, except by walking. I mean, walking's great, but it doesn't solve everybody's problems. And,
No, I agree with that, and I also, and this comes back to what we were talking about before with the location of the big box. To make somebody use a walking path, it has to be an interesting walk, and walking behind, Walmart to get to the sub shop on the other side of it isn't something that's necessarily inviting to people. Whereas more of the smaller shops that meander between them in an open air mall kind of a concept probably does invite people to go take a walk down to the next shop and pick up whatever's next.
Right.
But again, I know you guys have some commercial requirements you've got to make work too. Desiree.
Just one quick thought, or I guess more of a question first. The area that you're kind of breaking out to get the additional drainage square footage that the FW Web
Yes.
is required to have, is it possible to do an easement across that? The St. Gobain, is that a road, that's an easement road, right?
Yes.
Or is that to continue that through to maybe connect through, maybe you can do an easement over the FW Web?
I'd have to see the FWB final layout. The latest layout that I saw, slightly different than what's shown here, and they had some additional parking up in that area, which kind of blocks that from being a throughway, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I'll try to get a handle on their
Yeah.
latest plan and see what we can do.
It's the time if it's an option for them for sure.
Right.
It's a little soft right now, so, yeah, good.
Thank you.
Okay, we didn't vote on our continuance yet. Is there any other comments before we do? All in favor of continuing to September 9th? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0. We'll see you in a few weeks,
Great.
about a
Thank
month,
you very
I
much.
guess.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for spending a long time with us. Somewhere here I've got an agenda that'll tell me what to do next. Item number 4 on our agenda is Tomasian Drive, LLC as the applicant and the Stephanie Tomasian Revocable Trust of 2001 as the owner. A pre-submission hearing to discuss a proposed 19-lot cluster subdivision located at Tomasian Drive in the R1 Residential, Aquifer Conservation, and Flood Hazard Conservation Districts, and Shoreland Protection Area, Tax Map 4B, Lot 9-1. Donna, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from the applicant? Yeah, we can do that.
No, not at this time. We can hear
Okay,
from
we
the
will take
applicant.
2 minutes and let the applicant set up, and I think Lynn has already made use of our 2 minutes.
No, but
We
could shift this over. Cluster with septic.
I mean, this is already a very big lot, because it has all this
What?
wetland and buffer and setback.
Yeah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will reconvene the planning board after our stretch and setup time. We've read the agenda into the record, and there's nothing that the staff wishes to add to it. So with that, Ken, please introduce yourself for the record and tell us where we're at with the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ken Clinton with Meridian Land Services, for the record, representing Tomasian Drive LLC in this application. As the staff memo indicates, and you may recall, this is our second preliminary hearing with you. It's been a few months since we were here, and in that time we've been considering some design aspects, design the road, some preliminary drainage, etc. And in working out some of the aspects of the design, we kept coming back to a couple of comments that were made in our first hearing. There was a lot of discussion regarding the soils at that time, the suitability of the soils specifically for septic systems and the placement of those septic systems. We showed 4K boxes with test pits on each lot, and we were very diligent about explaining that it was proper per regulation, etc. However, we recognized a few comments, I think some by board members, and certainly I see Mr. Gagnon in the audience, and he had some specific comments relative to the creation of the ordinance, how it applied, some of his concerns. And there was a fair amount of discussion about some of the septic areas being quote-unquote tight, if you will. Even though they might meet, or they did meet all the regulations, the town has the 20-foot setback to property lines, the state has 10. The test pits were certainly suitable, and everything was sized appropriately, but there was a general feeling by some members of the board, I believe, and certainly by Mr. Gagnon, that it was a bit tight. Well, before we went to final, I thought that needed to be addressed. And in particular, as I zoom in on the cul-de-sac portion of this, these 6 lots here, prior to the actual cul-de-sac, were really the ones that were more quote-unquote tight. And as we thought about some remedies, really it's a matter of the width of the building area, less so the frontage. Let's, for instance, say Lot 6 here. Lot 6 has a fair amount of frontage. It's about 180, 200 feet wide in its frontage. However, due to the wetland on that property, as well as you see the buffer here and then the building setback, well, then that effective building area width is about 85 feet. Well, yes, we can put a house on it, and it's fully designed as far as being able to have a septic, et cetera. We're comfortable with that. However, it could use with a little extra width. While the slot next to it might have about 150 feet wide, we felt if we extended this road system 150 feet to the west, we would be able to take these 6 lots and apply a little bit varying values to each one of them to make, quite frankly, a better subdivision. And by better, it doesn't mean that it's any more compliant necessarily. It just would give more flexibility to whomever's building the house, and quite frankly to the end user, which is the resident. And we all know that even though if we design a septic system that's appropriate, installed properly, that an owner may ultimately do something to that septic system that they may not maintain it properly, or they may put something down the drain that's not supposed to, what have you. By having a little extra width on these 6 lots in particular, it would alleviate a potential problem. It would help in case there is a problem in the future, which, once again, we can't control nor enforce, but it made sense that we considered it. Reason why we're here is if we do add about another 150 feet to this cul-de-sac location and provide, say, that's not the same site. If we provide extra width to this and place the cul-de-sac further west, thereby opening up these 6 lots, everything gets shifted and expanded to a certain degree, and quite frankly, this configuration we exceed 50%, or conversely, we don't have the required 50% of the open space, which is a requirement in the zoning. Now, I'm not sure how that 50% was arrived at. To me, it's a bit arbitrary. When you consider this property in particular and some of the ecological, I guess, importance of what we're protecting, specifically down along the Sauhegan River, I think the quality of the open space should count substantially towards its compliance with the ordinance. However, it's a straight number in the ordinance, 50%. That's the threshold. If you don't have it, then you're not compliant. Well, considering some of the comments and certainly Pete Gagnon's thoughts about this, we said, well, maybe we can go for a zoning variance. Maybe it's reasonable to pursue if everybody thought it was a worthwhile endeavor to have a little extra length on this cul-de-sac road, open up a few of those lots so that they might be a little bit more user-friendly in the future. We can do that. Well, I'm not sure what the board's position on that, if it would be supportive or not. In trying to brainstorm this, we actually came up with another option. And I can't say that I've had an awful lot of experience with the board in open space subdivisions, but it's been past practice that I've seen that the open space itself, the lot is actually entirely in fee ownership, whether it be conveyed to the town or whether it's fractionally owned by each of the residents. So in this case, there's 19 lots. It could be fractionally owned, so each resident would own 1/19th interest. It could be conveyed to a separate entity all in itself. However, I'm not sure that I've seen what I'm suggesting here, which would be if we did take the fee, the lot portion of this open space, and have it be slightly less than 50%, in this particular case, what I show here is 46.8, almost 47%. We could also apply the ordinance, which is proper, and have some easements along the backs of some of these lots that would then, and I'm running my cursor along the potential easement strips. What I show there is about a 40-foot wide strip. That would make this compliant again, in total, to be greater than 50% open space. The reason why I say this is possible is because I took a closer look at the ordinance itself. And under 3.08, which is the cluster section, items number 12 and 13 speak to open space. And item 12 reads that the open space is to be private, public, or cooperative nonprofit ownership and shall be designed by the cluster development applicant. So in this case, part of the open space would be in fee in a single lot, and that could be conveyed to the town if everybody was agreeable and the Conservation Commission felt that was something they would like to pursue. And then a portion of it could be under easement on top of lots, which, if you use that thought process, quite frankly, all of these lot lines could be extended to the far side, and the open space could strictly be an easement. Because if you go to item number 13 in the cluster regulations, the opening sentence reads, open space within a cluster development shall be protected by recreation and conservation easements. So it's understood that there's variable options for the ownership of the open space, whether it's one entity, the town, one entity, a separate holder, or a fractional interest entity, being the 1/19th interest. And then there's a second understanding that it's going to be protected by easement. So after reading these two over again, I said, well, if the common goal is to make a few of these lots that were deemed somewhat tight, a little bit wider in their building area, and the option of the zoning pursuit may not really be appropriate or fully supported or achievable perhaps, clearly this option of having a dual type of open space meets the regulation or meets the ordinance, that is, and achieves that purpose. So in short, this allows for a better subdivision by alleviating some perceived tightness on those lots while fully being compliant with the ordinance. And this is the prime reason why we're here. I'd like some feedback on this. As I said, we've worked out some drainage on this. I feel comfortable with all the other design components. But before we put the final package together and submitted it, I felt we certainly needed to come in and share with you our approach, our thoughts, and reasoning behind it, and get some feedback to see how the board feels about it. So that's a very brief presentation of why we're here tonight. So I'd be happy to take some board questions.
No objection to brevity. With respect to the area you're talking about, where you've got a land that's in fee and then there'd be a 40-foot easement along the backs of those lots, would you see the construction envelope observing a setback from that easement in addition to the 40 feet? So 40 feet easement and then a 20-foot setback, and then the building envelope starts there?
Well, actually, in theory, yes, that same situation. Unfortunately, in an open space, conventional setbacks don't apply, and you have a 5-foot setback. However, I don't expect that the nature of construction would even come close to that additional open space easement. So if you were suggesting there might be a voluntarily more stringent setback towards that, in short, I would say yes, that's entirely possible.
Okay. I'm not sure that it's just something I wanted to clarify. I'm not sure how.
For
important it
instance,
is.
let's look at lot 7. If this is the value, this is the separation where 50% is achieved, for instance, a house and septic will be up in the front. Are you saying that you felt we should have a building setback that was, say, in this vicinity, another 25, 30 feet from the easement?
I don't know that 25 or 30 feet is the right number. I just wanted to know. I wanted to clarify that they would be treated separately so that you don't say the 40-foot easement encompasses the setback and you can build right on the line of the easement.
At the very minimum, I would agree that the 5-foot should apply. However, I think that's a little light as far as.
It may well be, and it really matters to me more at the end lots where you may be dealing with a kind of a wildlife corridor at the end of the lots
Yep.
at the top of the.
Yep.
Because that's really where your land is getting narrowed in terms of what the open area is.
Yeah.
How
and
wide is that strip from the back of the last
This
lot?
is 100 feet. As you all know, the open space subdivisions require the 100-foot buffer towards the perimeter, so you don't adversely affect the what otherwise would be a larger density property, residential property adjacent to it. In this case, as we all know, this is town conservation land as it is, so we wouldn't be
There's no
adversely
corridor.
affecting a higher lots, residential lots of conventional size, if you will. So this is at 100. If we were to apply some easement or additional setback along this line, I think that would be agreeable.
Yeah. Well, with the town's conservation land beyond there, you're already achieving the conservation goal of having the wildlife corridor.
Correct.
Since you're not
Y-
narrow,
yeah.
I mean,
If you were to take a look
can't
at our
quite make that out.
cover sheet, sorry, if you would take a look at our cover sheet, you said the property surrounding it is substantial and undeveloped under the conservation easement.
Okay.
The island property, correct.
Are there other comments or questions by members of the board?
So, Ken, when you're talking about the easement, then the building envelope would be protected, but, so that would also prevent, say, something like a shed that would go in the back? Is that what you're talking about, or?
Absolutely, nothing could go in that easement.
Nothing,
That's
right.
open space, and it's subject to this very same easement language and conditions that a singular lot of open space would be as well. The easement wouldn't be a separate easement. It would cover all of that land.
Right.
In fee ownership as well as the overlapping easement to the private property.
Okay.
Desiree?
Just with regards, refresh my memory on the open space requirement, the landscaping that would be required there, because that overlap, is it natural landscaping that's going to stay there, or what would you?
The landscape requirement comes in, I think if I understand the question, at the 100-foot. We had a property that we did a subdivision on not too long ago off of Pearson Road, and we talked about certain reductions to that landscape buffer. In this case, this landscape buffer, the 100-foot is entirely within the open space, so there'd be no disturbance whatsoever to it. So if we then provided additional buffer beyond that limit, then that would be subject to the no cut as well.
So that we're speaking to the easement that you're now talking about, and
So
there
if we're
that would
talking
be no
about
cut.
an easement strip here, say back a lot 7, once again, this would have a no cut. I mean, it's part of the open space, it's not to be disturbed, it's for wildlife and recreation purposes perhaps.
Okay, thank you. for
And so in terms of
clarification.
buffer, though, it would be accomplished by being a no cut, leave the natural woodland there, not plantings or.
No, I mean, it's
Well,
to
we're
be
not
left in its
requiring you to
natural
plant
state.
anything either, so, okay.
Yeah.
In terms of what Mike was asking about, outbuildings and sheds and things like that, I guess this is the same regardless of whether you put an easement on the back, but backing up to conservation land, I don't know who would know if you put the shed 20 feet into the town's property. I don't know how you make that enforceable. I know that it doesn't really change based on what you're proposing today, because that's always the case with an open space. And it ended up being the case at the outlet mall where all of those properties over there had their sheds built on the outlet outlet mall's property.
Yeah, well, as a requirement of the lot itself, lot monumentation, I can say that these aren't terribly far. This is roughly about 150 feet wide, this lot 7 currently configured. There's going to be bounds in the grounds or iron pins for rear lot corners. Initially, when the home is purchased, they'll be evident painted, but it's in subsequent years, it is an enforcement item, and I'm not sure how having this scenario would differ as far as enforcement from just
No,
any
you're right.
other manner. I do understand the question, though.
Other comments or questions, members of the board? Nelson?
I'd like to hear, I didn't quite hear what you said about monumentation. There'll be monuments in the front of each stone, obviously, along the road.
Yeah.
And then what do you do on the back corners?
We said iron pins.
Iron pins.
or pipes in the back corners, and they're generally
And-
in the woods or in the
Yeah.
undeveloped sections. We leave them up several inches so they can be found.
Yeah, and how do you mark the easement boundary?
Well, technically, there's no requirement to either
Yeah.
mark the easement boundary in the regulations or open space boundaries other than the occasional monument along the line. So I'm not sure at this point that we're proposing to mark that.
Yeah.
Um,
Would you
but-
object to marking it? It seems to me, if it's something we want to
I'm not
enforce, it ought to be
opposed to
marked.
that in some fashion, in some measure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the mark would be tonight, but I'm
Yeah.
sure we can talk about it and propose something that's, reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, a pin would be something so the landowner knows where it is.
Yeah.
And
This is as far as I can
Yeah.
put my fence.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and when the homes are developed, the town has the plot plan requirements. And
Yes.
so as we, if we were to proceed with providing some construction services on this property, a lot owner would have a plot plan showing where their house is, where their driveway is, any easements on the property, and that is a part of the record as well, not just an obscure plan that might be at the registry and noted in a deed that's
Yeah.
forgotten someplace. It's actually, it's a good tool to be able to have.
Well, I'm going one step further. I want to mark in the field so the
Yeah.
landowner can find it. That's what I'm asking.
Stop mowing,
Yeah,
go
yeah.
further with the mower, that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful to have, and if you're gonna find those back corners, put iron pins on them, measuring 40 feet up from the back corner, put another pin, probably isn't too tough to do. Mike?
I know on other properties, a little different than this, we talked about putting some sort of kind of open space signage or something like that. I don't know if that warrants it here, but if it tied into the conservation theme, or if there was a way to do that, aesthetically pleasing to the lots, I'd be open to doing something like that.
I think, Ken, that was one of your projects, the one across from
Pearson
Reed's
Road.
Ferry School
Yeah.
and Pearson Road. We had some areas that were access to the open area, and we put some kind of signage that said walking path or something, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm sure we can work out, that's a relatively small, minor detail that we can achieve
Yeah.
some agreement on.
Conceptually, what you're proposing in terms of the way that you're spreading it out and accomplishing, particularly on that one lot that's by the wetland, I like the idea and the thought process. I can support it.
These two certainly, they were the most tight, if you will. And once again, as Pete Gagnon had spoke to some of his concerns last time, we certainly, we listened, we understood them. Once again, even though something might meet or exceed the regulations today, how it's used, how a property is used in the future by not just the first buyer, but the second or third one, it made sense to pursue this, quite frankly.
Stan?
Yeah. After this is built, will it be turned over to an association?
The open space itself?
Well, it's
or-
the whole property. Sometimes developments are built, developer sells the land, and within 2 years, he turns it over to an association. And if there was an association, they would have it in the rules that you can't use that land because it's
It-
public land.
Yeah, if this, and we talked about hoping to convey the fee open space as land to the town of Merrimack to be overseen by the Conservation Commission, and the easement would be part of that oversight as well. If for whatever reason that doesn't happen, then there would be an association of homeowners, 1/19th interest most likely, that they would have the obligation and the responsibility to preserve it as open space. The lots and the right-of-way itself, the right-of-way is proposed to be a public road to be conveyed and turned over to the town, and the lots are just individual residential lots like any others in town.
I mean, you can certainly arrange it any way that you want, but if you do convey the fee to the Conservation Commission and it becomes a public roadway so that you don't have any commonly owned land that has to be managed by an association, that certainly makes life simpler for everybody in the world going forward so that the neighbors don't have to deal with each other.
It does.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would also say the Conservation Commission probably would have an interest in this because of your riverfront property. And they would control all of that land that's in the 250-foot barrier to the river. So I would encourage acceptance by the Conservation Commission, but I don't speak for them.
Understood.
Lynn?
I would highly discourage setting it up as an association. It adds a level of everything to the whole thing that I would not be in favor of that at all.
That would not be the preference, so I understand.
No question.
Stan, did you have another comment, or?
Yeah, the thing I don't understand is when you were just talking about, Nelson talking about turning over the 250-foot piece of property to the river to be controlled by the Conservation Commission. How did they do that?
Well, in this case, if we were to convey the open space lot as well as the additional easement area to the town, it's conveyed to the town, because the town proper is the political body that would accept ownership. Conservation Commission would then have the oversight authority to manage it. In this case, all of this lands that my cursor is crossing over, that's all part of the open space lot. And it was designed that way because that's the most sensitive part of this property. So the shoreline protection zone reaches to 250 feet off the river, and that's this line here. So all of the shoreland area is fully within the open space lot. So it gets conveyed to the town authorizes the Conservation Commission to oversee and manage it and
I guess I was confused, and what I really wanted to ask, is there any physical work that involves the Conservation Commission?
Not that's required of them. If they choose to, they can do so, but it also goes to some of the terms and specifics of the open space easement document, covenants and restrictions, what is allowed, what's not allowed. You may recall, if you were here when I talked about this the first time, the Ireland parcel has very specific restrictions. I think maybe a wheeled vehicle, if you will, a bike might be allowed, but certainly not a motorized one. It gets into that specificity that certain things are allowed, and that was set aside and allowed for recreation, but I don't believe that any trails are currently constructed. In this case, the Tomasians over the years have constructed quite a nice trail that actually encompasses the perimeter of their property, so it's already there.
No, my only concern was that 10 years down the line, it could be a whole new Conservation Commission, and that might not agree with some of this thing, if there was physical work, not just putting up a sign, like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. If there's no other comments by the board, at least for the moment, we can take a little public input. Any members of the public or abutters wish to weigh in on the proposed 19-lot cluster subdivision with a 20th lot to the town? Pete? Pete, is it better for you to sit with the microphone? Because we could just hand it to you and you can sit in the front row. If you don't want to just stand up there, just take the microphone and sit down with it. There you go. Yeah. I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Yes. You can. Either that or you Pete at the microphone on this.
I'm sorry, I have a problem hearing you. The board from up here, the acoustics are really bad. My hearing is...
I'm sorry for that. I know we all know you, Pete, but for our note taker, please introduce yourself at the record.
Well, I had a number of things I wanted to talk about tonight, but some of these, what I'm going to have to say is that it's going to boil down to the same thing, that the cluster form is definitely the better way to go. I see a very substantial improvement in there that provides more separation for on-site disposal systems, more separation for lawn care, fertilizers, and things of that type that normally get into the water courses that have been a very, very big problem in the town of Merrimack. Yet we had the soil information back in the 70s when we're having all these problems, 70s and 80s. we could have averted millions of dollars spent by taxpayers to actually go in and have to sewer these things after the fact. But in any event, that's history. The soils redefinition work that the soil scientists did, I looked at that very closely, and it's a very good job, quite honestly. And it's very helpful in determining the effect of development on the different types of soils that are located within there. The other part of it is that regardless of the soils work, most of those soils are still rated under the Soil Conservation Service mapping, which is, I'll explain that later, but under the soil conservation mapping, they're still rated severe. But under the state of New Hampshire soils grouping, in which they group the subsoils together, they allow a more intense development. So subsequently, this is a good trade-off, good combination of soils versus development. If there's any waivers needed, it might be worthwhile to waiver the roads, but where I see the cul-de-sac, it's about the best place you could put it. You don't want another crossing in there. Also, it helps it adds value to the lots, which adds value to the town. One thing that's very important that comes out in the SCS reports deals with roads and frost actions. This is not even considered in the state's soils redefinition, but it has to be considered in this town. The other part of it is that there are water tables up in that particular area that are quite high, so subsequently the homes have to be raised. Leach fields are going to have to go up. The question comes along, and I'm sure they can solve that, is where they're going to get the material to do that, but I think they have enough material who can bring some in to do the job. The other important thing that you have to consider is that when DES approves a subdivision and septic systems, they also do that with a disclaimer that they're not responsible, because the representation is made by the engineers and adopted by the town inspectors, adopted by the planning board, and that type of thing. It gets them off the hook, but puts us right back on it if the job is not done right. And that's one of the things that troubled me, because that history in the past is really a hard thing to shake, in my opinion. So with that, I guess probably I could suggest a number of other ideas on the easements and the subdivision, but I'm not doing the engineering work. It's not my job. So I'll leave that to the applicant's engineers. The other most important thing I want to bring to your attention is simply this. When you're looking at plans for a development of any type, whether it be the ZBA or whether it be the Merrimack Conservation District or the Planning Board for that matter, be sure to look for the signatures that certify the soil survey, and they're signed off and dated, the soil redefinition work, these surveyors, the engineers, surveyors, all these things are very important, so you're not operating with a wide open door here, where once they put those stamps on there, they are representing to the town that this is what you see and what you're going to see when you get done. So with that, I think I'll just close this out and allow them to continue with their presentation, unless you have any particular questions.
Does any member of the board have questions for Pete? No, thank you for coming out, Pete. Appreciate it. Are there any other butters or citizens who wish to weigh in on the project? Seeing none come forward, we can close the public hearing portion. Ken, have you heard enough of us in terms of what we think of the easement idea, or do you want an actual vote, or what works for you?
No, I'm quite comfortable. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear to the board what the goal, what we're attempting to do, and that indeed it complied with the ordinance, and so that's how we'd like to pursue it.
Okay. I haven't taken a look at the ordinance, and I know that the staff hasn't seen your proposal, so offering them an opportunity to weigh in on how you've interpreted the ordinance is important to do. But conceptually, in terms of the function of the lot, I think that what you've done is good engineering, and I like the objectives of it.
I would expect, for benefit of staff, that we would probably look to set up a meeting as we will pursue this road length, and some of our previous preliminary drainage might shift a bit. We'll come in and we'll sit down with them and give them an opportunity to weigh in and have share any concerns with the ordinance language. But I'm pretty comfortable that it's clear and appropriate.
Yep. I just want to reserve for them the opportunity to do that because they haven't had a chance to look at it before you've presented it to
Understood.
us.
Agreed.
So, Desiree, you had a comment?
Yeah, just one comment. When you were presenting this in the beginning, going through the different steps that you used to get to extending this up, the 100 to 150 feet.
150 feet.
150 feet, you moved it up. The thought popped in my head that that you could do an easement along the waterway, because I thought that that's kind of where you were going with it. Like the water.
Oh,
is it a wetlands
the
crossing?
wetlands.
It comes wetlands
Okay.
crossing through there. So
Wow.
just more a comment / a question through there.
Yeah.
If you did an easement along the side of there, because
This is,
it
let me,
open-
can I help you out, Desiree?
Yeah.
Do you mind?
Yeah.
This green line is the actual limit of the wetland.
Okay.
And then there's a 25-foot buffer that's in force as an underlying requirement. And then there's a 40-foot building setback to it. Are you suggesting a wider easement beyond the 40 feet to the edge of the
No,
wetland?
just counting that as square footage towards your 50%.
No. Is it a natural buffer? Can owners go through and landscape that and
Up
put
to
their
the 20
fertilizers?
Up to the
and-
25-foot.
Is
the-
where
the-
it's the
the-
cutoff. You're not supposed to do
yes.
that through that point.
The 40-foot limit is a building setback structure, but you can disturb, if you will, close to 25 feet.
25 feet.
That's the
Okay.
underlying ordinance for the wetland.
And your 50% increase, that was a 25-foot setback that you did along the backside of all the properties?
This is 40 at this
That's-
moment, and that's the straight calculation, if you will, for exactly 50%.
Okay.
I'm not saying that we're going to limit it to 40, but that's the minimum we would have to do in that configuration to reach the 50% threshold. It may work out that it's more appropriate to do 40 on this side, but perhaps 50 on the opposite side.
Okay.
We're required a minimum for the 50% open space, and I have a sense that we'll probably be over that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'm sorry for trying to clarify and making it worse. Stan?
I just want to clarify my mind a little bit.
Oh, boy.
Amherst Road, does it have sewerage on it?
No.
No, okay, that was the only question I had, that's all. Because I couldn't understand why you didn't run sewerage on the drive.
That would have been fantastic, but
Yeah.
not
Well,
in
it
that
was
corner
just-
of town.
We wouldn't have to worry about septic systems and the location of the houses.
But we are
on-
extending water,
Yeah.
and that's actually a big component to this as well.
Thank you.
Nelson, did
I
you have
just
a comment?
wanted to commend him for some creative thinking on this interpretation of the
Yeah.
ordinance to make a better solution than perhaps the strict following the letter of the law would
Right.
allow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with that. I think that it is a creative way to do that. I owe Alistair the favor of bringing up an issue that he wanted me to bring up. It has nothing to do with what you proposed here, but his expectation, and mine would be as well, that as this goes forward, the utilities would be underground for this. I know with the 3 lots on the other side that we waived that requirement that the electric utilities be underground and that there's poles. Hopefully, the these two projects get aligned and all of those utilities for both sides of the road could be underground. But certainly for these 19, his expectation, as long as mine is, that we go with the requirement of the regulation, which is underground
Understood.
for all of them. I understand from the staff that with respect to water connections and the road development and the 3-lot subdivision, there's, I don't know, some design consternation going on with respect to what sequence things get done in and whether they can be coordinated and all that. Are you familiar with that issue, and is there anything that we can do tonight to help you along that path?
I am familiar. The 3-lot subdivision that is connected in the sense that it's directly across the street from this and was the precursor, if you will, to some of these, some of the current design. There are some road upgrades that are planned for Temesian Drive. We've been discussing that with staff. It's likely that utilities will be installed, and that will occur in advance of this particular subdivision coming back before you in a final sense, or it'll be done in that same time period. So we're fully aware of the process that needs to go through and some of the design requests from staff. So I'm comfortable that we'll be able to proceed with upgrades on Temesian Drive, partially in advance and in conjunction while we're moving this through the process.
Okay, as long as you're comfortable. I just thought while you were here if there's anything that you needed from us that would help you get those two things in parallel so that we end up with all of our utilities done ahead of asphalt.
It's in a master plan sort of sense where it's all being put together.
Yeah, to pick a theme, sure.
Yeah.
So you don't need anything from us tonight on that?
No.
Okay, good. Any other comments or questions by members of the board? If there's nothing else that you need from us,
And that's it.
do you have a particular, this is just a
Preliminary,
pre-submission hearing,
we'll
so
be
until you
we'll be
submit.
submitting the final application in a new hearing sense, so that'll be forthcoming. You do want to? Okay. All right. As far as John Tenhave of Temesian Drive LLC just reminded me, we certainly are committed to the internal sidewalk as it's a new road, but as far as the sidewalk on Temesian Drive, since it's neither a collector or arterial road, and we're merely doing upgrades within the right-of-way, I want to reiterate that we don't plan on having sidewalks designed and installed on Temesian Drive. We had made the same kind of comments our first hearing, and I understand from that it was concurred that Temesian Drive, while the current public road, because of its nature, would not require sidewalks.
Comments and thoughts by members of the board on that? I don't remember earlier discussion on sidewalks with that piece. I do with the 3-lot subdivision, but because it's going to be a very lightly used private road, not public road, but very lightly used, I could see that there's an argument that a sidewalk would be a construction expense without a lot of return.
It says, if I could just make a quick explanation on that, section 4.20, pedestrian ways and sidewalks. Item number 2 reads, a paved pedestrian facility shall be constructed along all existing or proposed collector or arterial streets or streets constructed as part of a subdivision. So the latter we would fall into with the new road. The former, since we're neither a collector or arterial street, we would not fall under that requirement.
I won't argue with your interpretation. I think that makes sense.
Interpretation is correct.
Yeah. And so, would you like some more formal confirmation of that, or is our head nodding
Your
enough?
head nodding is fine, and we can just close the loop with staff as well.
Okay, sounds good. So you're planning to build it on proposed road, I guess Nelson Disco Way or something, whatever they're going to call that.
To be named.
Yeah. But not on Temesian Drive.
Correct.
Anything else that you need from us before we move on?
No.
Thank you for coming in and offering the presentation and the creative work. I think also I want to compliment you on the pre-submission hearing approach to working these projects through. I think it works well.
Better to have it out now than to come in and have to do a lot of rework. So I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to item 5 on our agenda, which is discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern. I don't have any items of concern on my mind, other than to say that 2 of our members were interviewed tonight by the town council for reappointment, and I expect that would come before the town council on, what was it, the 21st? 21st, yes. 21st of August, for the reappointment of both Lynn and Mike. So keep your fingers crossed that they pull through for us. Any other comments or items of concern? Yes. That's it. Item number 6 on our agenda is approval of the minutes of July 22nd, 2014. I'm not sure what I did with mine. What's the will of the board with respect to the minutes of July 22nd, 2014? Moved by Lynn Christensen to approve as printed. Is there a second for that?
I second. I have
Second by
comments.
Desiree Fault with potential changes. What do you got?
On page 2, the sentence set from 50 to 52, it reads kind of awkward to me, where it says, Chairman Best asked if the parcel for 1 million square foot use is subdivided. Would there remain 50 acres required for the CUP? I think it should be a question mark after that. And then Director Thompson stated that there are roughly a total of 150 acres. With the current estimate, there would remain over 90 acres for the CUP.
Okay, I agree with
Does
the
that make
question
sense?
mark, yeah.
Does that,
Question mark where?
After the
I-
first sentence, after our Chairman Best asked,
yeah,
finish that off with a question.
yeah. I guess the other thing, it's clear enough that it's just subtracting the difference, I guess. Yeah, no, sorry about that. Yeah, and then same page, line item 59. It's basically saying where it says "and was informed it would not." I don't know who said that. I guess so.
Counselor Keating.
Was informed by whom?
Construction already be on the side of the driveway would cause a problem as far as the CUP and was formed.
Who
informed.
informed Tom that it would not? I think is the question.
I don't know.
Well,
Oh, I
did
think the
Director
applicant
Thompson
did.
say it?
I think the applicant answered that question. He was talking about the 120,000 square foot warehouse next to the restaurant and whether they could cross the existing St. Gobain driveway. And I think it was the applicant who said that they had the legal wherewithal to make that possible in terms of
I
the.
actually thought it was Tim that said it was considered contiguous as far as.
Oh, okay.
he was concerned.
Okay.
So, and Tim informed him it would not.
Okay,
Tim.
perfect. Thank you.
Or Director Thompson.
Yes.
That's a given. That's a given.
Anything else?
That's all I had.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to approve with changes. Are there any other suggested changes?
Sorry, one more, sorry. This one seemed important to me. Page 3, item 21, I believe the ending should change to it, so I'll start on 19. There are 2 immediate items that have been identified as priorities to be addressed by the year end. Master planning in the outside of the urban compact along the Daniel Webster Highway, and ensuring appropriate use of sidewalk funds. I'd like to change that to appropriate use of sidewalk payment in lieu of, or sidewalk funds. Because really I'm talking about the payment in lieu of. I think it's more clear.
Yeah, developers' funds paid in lieu of sidewalk or something like that.
Yeah,
Proper use
ensuring
of funds paid in lieu of sidewalks.
Paid.
in
yes.
lieu of, yes, perfect, paid in lieu of sidewalks. Thank you.
Anything else?
No, that's it, I promise. Thanks.
Last chance. Nope.
All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Mr. Disco and Mr. Bonaslawski abstaining. So that is a 5-0-2 approval for the minutes of July 22nd. That brings us to item number 7 on our agenda, which is to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Counselor Koenig. Second by
Second.
Mr. Disco. Glad to have a second for that one. I'd hate to have that motion
Yeah,
fail
right.
for lack of a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0. We are adjourned. Don't forget to turn your microphone off.